Mr. Trump is at 212. And Kamala is at 119. But the numbers have changed in the last 2 hours. I believe Kamala is at 152. How? 230. Oh my goodness. Huh? 230. So that's the latest. And Kamala is at 205. I said it, it's too close to call. 205, 230. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. We are awaiting our key guest speaker, Dr. David Ndii. In the meantime, two of our panelists are already here, Mrs. Miriam Musangi, Chairperson, Women in Manufacturing Committee for KAM and Managing Director for HACO, and Mr. Sandeep Main from KPMG. Both of these are here. Our moderator, Julians from Nation Media Group, is also here. We have members of the NCBA board. Mr. Ndegwa would be here. Members of the executive committee, we've not begun yet, so if you've not had breakfast, please have breakfast. Tumelipa.
At NCBA.
seen so far for Kenya. Karibuni sana. A warm welcome. I see some customers streaming in. Please have breakfast. We are going live. Abby, we are going live. Yes. Waiting for our guests. Nation Media Group, Business Daily, Citizen, KBC, KTN, TV47, East Africa, Capital FM. Mr. Wairegi, karibu sana. It's great to have you here, sir.
The beautiful display of vehicles, spare parts, trucks. It's really mesmerizing. When you go around and look at the beauties which are here, they are just blowing your mind off, yeah?
The innovations that have been done since 5 years ago, just going around the new vehicles we have seen, talks of hybrid, talks of electric vehicles. NCBA has been at the forefront of driving electric vehicle adoption in this country, setting aside 2 billion shillings to support customers who want to acquire electric vehicles. And more recently, we announced that we are going to be rolling out charging stations. And indeed, we have already rolled 2 in our main center for customers and for the public.
That whole new infrastructure of electric motorbikes, electric vehicles, is an area that we would like us to invest. Investment in new battery making technology. We would like to position Kenya as the manufacturer of electric motorbikes for Africa.
As we progress and develop the infrastructure, all the importers of new vehicles are actually gearing up to bring their different models of EV vehicles. And very soon, you will see at least 4 or 5 different brands putting forward their EVs on the road.
NCBA is the biggest financier of vehicles in this country. We like to brag that when you're driving, just count 3 cars ahead of you. The third one is probably financed by NCBA.
At NCBA, we offer insurance premium financing that enables you to pay for your annual insurance needs conveniently in installments of between 4 to 10 months. Our NCBA insurance premium financing allows you the ease of repayment, enables you to maintain your cash flows and liquidity. We do not require additional security, and with a minimum of 25,000 shillings, you can have one IPF for multiple policies. The application process is easy, efficient, and hassle-free, with no hidden charges or fees. We will process the facility in your favor and pay the full premiums to the insurance company. For more information, reach us on ipf@ncbagroup.com and let us ease your insurance premium repayment process. NCBA is regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya.
Thank you for being an integral part of the NCBA family. Together, we have achieved incredible milestones in building a bigger and more impactful business. I am immensely proud of what we have accomplished. Here at NCBA, we have identified sustainability as a key priority for our organization. It is more than a goal. It is recognizing that our license to operate is granted by the communities we serve. As a brand whose purpose is to inspire greatness, we have an opportunity to catalyze action towards a greener and more sustainable future. We believe that a sustainable future is a better future for everyone, that collectively we can chart a path forward to a more resilient society that can navigate the challenges of the future. That is why we're unveiling our sustainability commitments, our commitments to drive change and invest in our collective future. Through financing green projects and e-mobility solutions, we are doing our part to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Our internal operations are also being retrofitted to reduce waste, enhance energy efficiency, and reduce our carbon footprint. We continue our tree growing efforts with an aim to grow 10 million trees by 2030 and contribute to the regional agenda for nature-based solutions to this pressing climate crisis. But we can't do it alone. We believe that everyone has a role to play. That is why we are committed to working with you, our stakeholders, our customers, and indeed our communities. We've made significant progress, but there's still work to be done. So join me in changing the story by committing to do these 5 things. 1, becoming more energy efficient. 2, ditching single-use plastics. 3, becoming an avid tree grower. 4, thinking before you print. And 5, becoming a sustainability champion and evangelizing to your community. Together, let's build a culture of responsibility and impact that leaves a legacy for generations to come. Join me and change the story. A sustainable future starts by doing good today.
letu ni kupanda miti leo to change the story from this very hot day to a day when we can all sit here without needing to have a tent because we'll have kivuli ya kutosha.
This initiative is not just about planting trees, it's about planting hope, planting responsibility, and ensuring a brighter future for us all.
We are going to beautify the school by providing shade in schools. Other than that, we are mitigating on climate change.
We as NCBA have committed to plant 10 million trees by 2030. But we shall do that working with partners, working with schools like we are doing here, and working with others.
We intend to plant at least an average of 300 to 500 trees across in every school in Nakuru County. And this is what we want to replicate across the entire country. The Green Schools project gives a good platform for between NCBA and Baboon Project Kenya to teach the young children about environment conservation. This is something that they would not be taught in a normal classroom.
It's our children who are leading the way in this effort, and that makes me incredibly proud. You, the young people here, are showing us all how important it is to take care of our earth.
The school is facing mass dropout of children due to poor state of facilities. Majority of the children learners are raised from the families that are vulnerable in the economic sense.
We work with partners to make sure that we join them to rehabilitate the halls, to rehabilitate the kitchen, to rehabilitate where kids eat and such things.
We are privileged to have this opportunity and will go a long way to improving Kimathi Comprehensive School wholly.
My name is Tyrus Mithiga, Group Director for Retail Banking at NCBA Bank. NCBA recognizes that Kenyans in the diaspora are a very important part of our economy and the support system that exists both socially and economically in business and in families. So we've built a very strong proposition for diaspora customers across wherever they may be, whether that's within Africa, in Europe, Asia, as far as Australia, or in North America. And the key planks of this proposition recognizes that there's broadly three types of Kenyans in the diaspora. There are those who are freshly immigrating, and we've constructed solutions around how we might support those. There are those that have immigrated, they've lived there or they're moving to live there permanently. And of course, there's the other cohort that may be considering relocating back in Kenya. And so our diaspora proposition, which I think is a unique perspective on compared to all other banks in Kenya, recognizes those three types of diaspora customers have very different financial needs. For those relocating, they want to be linked up with employment agencies. And we've got a couple of partnerships that we have already signed up for people that are moving, whether it is nurses into Europe or into North America, so to provide that support and whatever financial support that is needed to facilitate those. We are also looking at those that have immigrated, have the unique need that they want to be able to remit money, they want to be able to invest, whether it is in financial instruments through an investment bank, or into, for example, developing properties that they have. And we've got a full package of financial products to support that. And equally, those that are relocating back, facilitating the transfer of wealth and how they settle down and the banking services that go with that. So it's a full house of products that seeks to address the unique needs for customers, whatever their nature. I would invite you to consider NCBA. We are the third largest bank in Kenya by balance sheet, by asset base, fastest growing bank in Kenya last year. And that strong performance gives you the confidence that you're talking to a large bank with a full range of services. We just announced, for example, last year that we are acquiring AIG, part of the American insurance group that are divesting out of Kenya. We were a shareholder in that and we're acquiring that. So we've got an investment bank, an insurance, a corporate bank that is the second largest in the country, a full retail bank with over 100 branches by the end of this year. And so that competence and that strength gives my customers the confidence that they are partnering, whether they want to invest, insure, borrow, save, or transact. As I said, it's a fully digitized bank, and we continue to innovate and invest in solutions and products and policies that are going to make it easier for you to find it a very pleasant banking experience with NCBA.
West Valley Sugar Company is able to do 1250 tons per day cane, which we are going to produce about 2,000 to 2,500 bags of sugar. That is in a daily basis. We get our sugar cane from the Kericho region, Kericho, Nandi, and Nyando, actually the Nyando zone. Currently, we have about 7,500 cane farmers. They range from 1 acre to even 1,000 acres. But the bigger range of the farmers we are looking at are the small-scale farmers, 1 acre to 5 acres.
In terms of the contribution to the area, you just look around the area, you see a real town is coming up slowly. You can see people's lives are changing for the better. This factory is employing a lot of locals. NCBA's commitment is that it will continue to support the development of local industries, the development of local factories like this. And certainly in so doing, we also support the supply chain, such as the farmers, the hundreds of drivers that I see transporting sugarcane into this factory, and many other small trucks that are taking that sugar to the shops and other wholesalers. We'll also be supporting farmers in this region who want to get into the transportation business, to get them loans to buy trucks and to buy tractors.
The elements of the EDP program that we admire is the diversity and inclusivity that it offers, from age groups to the range of businesses, to the types of businesses, to your grades of maturity of your business, that surely encourages you through the journey. You know, those that have run it for 10, 15 years, you see, mine is 3 years old, it is possible I'll get there. Some are very new and you realize they're dealing with problems that you solved, and I hope that interaction and the projects and work that you've done together has richly enriched that.
If you're differentiated, it means you are among the few in a place where there are many people who are not differentiated, and you are able to uplift the others through your contribution to society. So we expect you, once you have competency, you have good character, you will contribute to a better society, a better country, a better continent.
Most of the customers are enthusiastic about it. And so the fact that we are able to supplement the school fees, they are also able to network. With the many challenges, the answer is not always financial. Education and empowering yourself and also your employees is very key for the success of your business. So we encourage you to enroll to this program, get the benefits. The curriculum is well researched and placed to benefit most of the SMEs.
Kote nchini matumaini, tujitahidi, tujivunie, tuendelee mbele, twende mbele, 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 tuendelee. Twende mbele, 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 twende mbele, tuendelee. Mbele, Kenya, twende mbele.
Kenya,
Tuendelee.
twende mbele. NCBA, go for it.
The beautiful display of vehicles, spare parts, trucks, it's really mesmerizing. When you go around and look at the beauties which are here, they are just blowing your mind off, yeah?
The innovations that have been done since 5 years ago, just going around the new vehicles we have seen, talks of hybrid, talks of electric vehicles. NCBA has been at the forefront of driving electric vehicle adoption in this country, setting aside 2 billion shillings to support customers who want to acquire electric vehicles. And more recently, we announced that we are going to be rolling out charging stations. And indeed, we have already rolled 2 in our main center for customers and for the public.
That whole new infrastructure of electric motorbikes, electric vehicles, is an area that we would like us to invest. Investment in new battery making technology. We would like to position Kenya as the manufacturer of electric motorbikes for Africa.
As we progress and develop the infrastructure, all the importers of new vehicles are actually gearing up to bring their different models of EV vehicles. And very soon, you will see at least 4 or 5 different brands putting forward their EVs on the road.
NCBA is the biggest financier of vehicles in this country. We like to brag that when you're driving, just count 3 cars ahead of you. The third one is probably financed by NCBA.
At NCBA, we offer insurance premium financing that enables you to pay for your annual insurance needs conveniently in installments of between 4 to 10 months. Our NCBA insurance premium financing allows you the ease of repayment, enables you to maintain your cash flows and liquidity. We do not require additional security, and with a minimum of 25,000 shillings, you can have one IPF for multiple policies. The application process is easy, efficient, and hassle-free with no hidden charges or fees. We will process the facility in your favor and pay the full premiums to the insurance company. For more information, reach us on ipf@ncbagroup.com and let us ease your insurance premium repayment process. NCBA is regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya.
Thank you for being an integral part of the NCBA family. Together, we have achieved incredible milestones in building a bigger and more impactful business. I am immensely proud of what we have accomplished. Here at NCBA, we have identified sustainability as a key priority for our organization. It is more than a goal. It is recognizing that our license to operate is granted by the communities we serve. As a brand whose purpose is to inspire greatness, we have an opportunity to catalyze action towards a greener and more sustainable future. We believe that a sustainable future is a better future for everyone, that collectively we can chart a path forward to a more resilient society that can navigate the challenges of the future. That is why we're unveiling our sustainability commitments, our commitments to drive change and invest in our collective future. Through financing green projects and e-mobility solutions, we are doing our part to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Our internal operations are also being retrofitted to reduce waste, enhance energy efficiency, and reduce our carbon footprint. We continue our tree growing efforts with an aim to grow 10 million trees by 2030 and contribute to the regional agenda for nature-based solutions to this pressing climate crisis. But we can't do it alone. We believe that everyone has a role to play. That is why we are committed to working with you, our stakeholders, our customers, and indeed our communities. We've made significant progress, but there's still work to be done. So join me in changing the story by committing to do these 5 things. 1, becoming more energy efficient. 2, ditching single-use plastics. 3, becoming an avid tree grower. 4, thinking before you print. And 5, becoming a sustainability champion and evangelizing to your community. Together, let's build a culture of responsibility and impact that leaves a legacy for generations to come. Join me and change the story. A sustainable future starts by doing good today.
Letu ni kupanda miti leo to change the story from this very hot day to a day when we can all sit here without needing to have a tent because we'll have kivuli ya kutosha.
This initiative is not just about planting trees, it's about planting hope, planting responsibility, and ensuring a brighter future for us all.
We are going to beautify the school by providing shade in schools. Other than that, we are mitigating on climate change.
We as NCB have committed to plant 10 million trees by 2030. But we shall do that working with partners, working with schools like we are doing here, and working with others.
We intend to plant at least an average of 300 to 500 trees across in every school in Nakuru County. And this is what we want to replicate across the entire country. The Green Schools project gives a good platform for between NCB and the Baboon Project Kenya to teach the young children about environment conservation. This is something that they would not be taught in a normal classroom.
It's our children who are leading the way in this effort, and that makes me incredibly proud. You, the young people here, are showing us all how important it is to take care of our earth.
The school is facing mass dropout of children due to poor state of facilities. Majority of the children learners are raised from the families that are vulnerable in the economic sense.
We work with partners to make sure that we join them to rehabilitate the halls, to rehabilitate the kitchen, to rehabilitate where kids eat and such things.
We are privileged to have this opportunity and will go a long way to improving Kimathi Comprehensive School wholly.
My name is Tyrus Methiga, Group Director for Retail Banking at NCBA Bank. NCBA recognizes that Kenyans in the diaspora are a very important part of our economy and the support system that exists both socially and economically in business and in families. So we've built a very strong proposition for diaspora customers across wherever they may be, whether that's within Africa, in Europe, Asia, as far as Australia, or in North America. And the key planks of this proposition recognizes that there's broadly three types of Kenyans in the diaspora. There are those who are freshly immigrating, and we've constructed solutions around how we might support those. There are those that have immigrated, they've lived there or they're moving to live there permanently. And of course, there's the other cohort that may be considering relocating back in Kenya. And so our diaspora proposition, which I think is a unique perspective on compared to all other banks in Kenya, recognizes those three types of diaspora customers have very different financial needs. For those relocating, they want to be linked up with employment agencies. And we've got a couple of partnerships that we have already signed up for people that are moving, whether it is nurses into Europe or into North America, so to provide that support and whatever financial support that is needed to facilitate those. We are also looking at those that have immigrated, have the unique need that they want to be able to remit money, they want to be able to invest, whether it is in financial instruments through an investment bank, or into, for example, property, developing properties that they have. And we've got a full package of financial products to support that. And equally, those that are relocating back, facilitating the transfer of wealth and how they settle down and the banking services that go with that. So it's a full house of products that seeks to address the unique needs for customers, whatever their nature. I would invite you to consider NCBA. We are the third largest bank in Kenya by balance sheet, by asset base, fastest growing bank in Kenya last year. And that strong performance gives you the confidence that you're talking to a large bank with a full range of services. We just announced, for example, last year that we are acquiring AIG, part of the American insurance group that are divesting out of Kenya. We were a shareholder in that and we're acquiring that. So we've got an investment bank, an insurance, a corporate bank that is the second largest in the country, a full retail bank with over 100 branches by the end of this year. And so that competence and that strength gives my customers the confidence that they are partnering, whether they want to invest, insure, borrow, save, or transact. As I said, it's a fully digitized bank, and we continue to innovate and invest in solutions and products and policies that are going to make it easier for you to find it a very pleasant banking experience with NCBA.
West Valley Sugar Company is able to do 1250 tons per day, which we are going to produce about 2,000 to 2,500 bags of sugar. That is in a daily basis. We get our sugar cane from the Kericho region, Kericho, Nandi, and Nyando. Actually, the Nyando zone. Currently, we have about 7,000. $500 cane farmers. They range from 1 acre to even 1,000 acres. But the bigger range of the farmers we are looking at are the small scale farmers, 1 acre to 5 acres.
In terms of the contribution to the area, you just look around the area, you see a real town is coming up slowly. You can see people's lives are changing for the better. This factory is employing a lot of locals. NCBA's commitment is that it will continue to support the development of local industries, the development of local factories like this. And certainly in so doing, we to support the supply chain, such as the farmers, the hundreds of drivers that I see transporting sugarcane into this factory, and many other small trucks that are taking that sugar to the shops and other wholesalers. We'll also be supporting farmers in this region who want to get into the transportation business, to get them loans to buy trucks and to buy tractors.
Council of Economic Advisors, karibu sir. Members of the Board of Directors represented today from NCBA, karibuni sana. Mr. John Gashora, our Group Managing Director and CEO for NCBA. Our distinguished panelists, Mrs. Marianne Musangi, Mr. Sandeep, karibu sana. I see Julians is also here, ready to moderate our panel today. Madam Koimet, karibu sana. It's really great to see all our customers too. Today, we have guests joining us online. This is a public forum. People want to hear what's up with the economy. And we couldn't have asked for a better panel and conversation and speakers for today than our esteemed guests today. All protocols observed. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome. Good morning. Have we all had breakfast? Is your candidate winning in the US? I know a group director for risk is here. So it's like, you're a risk to the NCBA team, but people still bet back home. I must say I'm losing so far, but apparently it's too close to call. So let's watch what happens in the next 2 hours. A warm welcome to our esteemed guests in today's economic forum, Navigating Uncertainty, Key Trends Influencing the Economic and Business Environment in 2025. I've seen some of you saying the room is too warm, the room is too hot. It possibly feels like the macroeconomics. It might feel like austerity measures because we're in a much smaller room than last year when we were in the Serena. But it's not just about austerity measures. It's a good sign for the economy because in November, most hotels are really, really packed when it comes to conferences. That's a good sign for the economy. And so while we experience austerity today, we should also be glad that we find ourselves in a space where most of our hotels are taken up. And it's a sign for what our economies today will be breaking down. Before I move over to our agenda, let me share some reflections on corporate responsibility. And it goes with everything that's happening on social media. And I'll share a quick story that happened last year, 2023. Remember the tourist submersible that went to look for the Titanic in 2023? So that wreckage was found, but the news that was shared caught the attention of 5 million users in 10 days. So that was on June 25th, not June 25th of this year, June 25th of 2023. So the broadcast on the TikTok was that there was screams of the passengers in the last moment, except that the reality was that this was the wrong audio. The audio that the listeners were listening to was a video game series from the Five Nights at Freddy's. So when we talk of corporate responsibility, social media has become a distributor of news that has serious consequences globally, and what gets conflicted as the truth. And so when we gather today for the Economic Forum, we are here to listen to the experts, to get direct and factual information and not read it on social media. I know many of you read Dr. Ndi's commentary, especially on X. Today you'll be hearing from him live, which is a much better way to engage. And I call this thought leadership. This is what corporate responsibility is. Let's listen to the truth from the experts. Our vision at NCBA is to make sure that we always walk the journey with our customers to inspire your growth. And for those joining us online, karibuni. We are also expecting you to interact and ask our panelists questions. Today's hashtag is hashtag NCBA Economic Forum 2024. We are live streaming on our social media handles. That's YouTube, Meta, and also LinkedIn. I know we've lost 30 minutes of our time, so we'll do a quick run of the agenda for today and hopefully make up time so that we can spend enough detail on the question and answer and the panelist conversation. So we'll kick off with our corporate banking group director, that's Charles Omondi. We'll then have our CEO make his remarks, who will invite the keynote speaker. We'll then move to the panel that's moderated by Julians, our great journalist from the Nation Media Group. And then we'll move on to the photo session, gifts handover, and closing remarks by 10. So hopefully we can save you time and you get back to your businesses. Thank you, everybody, and a warm welcome for being here today. Dr. David Ndi is the chairperson, the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and he's here today. He always reminds us on X that any person can kick down the ban. So I'm pretty sure we are all here and we can kick down the ban. Mrs. Marianne Musangi, chairperson, Women in Manufacturing Committee for KAM, and also the HACO Industries Managing Director since 2019. She will be part of the panel to have conversations and share insights on businesses and how to navigate in the macroeconomics. Mr. Sandeep Main, Karibu Sana, also on our panel, Partner Tax and Regulatory Services at KPMG, and as I mentioned, our moderator, Julian's. NCBA Group, we have our board of directors. I see two of them here, and our CEO will introduce them. I see our CEO is also here, members of the executive committee. There's a number of us who are here. Charles Omondi, Raphael Agung, whose main customers are also here today. We'll be hearing from them. And the senior leadership that manages our customers. I see them here to Karibuni Sana. It now gives me a warm pleasure to invite our Acting Group Director, Corporate Banking, Charles Omondi, to kick us off today. Thank you.
Good morning. I'll take it, Nelly, that all protocols have been established, and quickly move to welcome you, our customers, today to this economic forum. I know I'd want to recognize my good friend Joshua Chepkoni, Jamii Telecom. Asante sana for being here. Long-serving customer, Mr. Arun Devani, I can see you. Asante sana. To all our customers, we really appreciate for you creating time to be here today. I know we need to yield to a lot of time, and I want to take this opportunity just to introduce my team, the sector heads who look after our business in corporate banking. So if you could all just stand up quickly. So we have Fozan Chobri, he looks after manufacturing sector. We have Wamboi Muhoro at the back there. She looks after non-banking financial institution. We have William Mugwima, is the sector head in charge of agriculture. We have Judy Mbethe, I can see you. She looks after institutional banking. Susan, who looks after energy, oil and gas, and telecommunication. We have Carol Arena, she looks after trade, transport, and logistics. I'm wondering where is okay, Sally, please. Sally, she's our director in charge of transactional banking. I think that's all. And Paul Jaka is representing Sankul Mandavia, who looks after our SACCO and community banking. So these are the leadership within corporate banking that handles our business. And in case we have any challenges, any additional business you want to give us for 2025, I can see Mr. Arun Devani looking at me intently. So please do approach us. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take this opportunity to introduce our group managing director and also our industry head, Mr. John Gashora, to give his keynote address.
Thank you, Charles. Distinguished guests, good morning. Good morning again. Let me welcome and allow me to recognize few people, whereas riding on the protocols already established. Let me welcome our keynote speaker, the chairperson, the President Council of Economic Advisors, and I like to call him Mr. X, for those who are on X, right? Dr. David D. I also want to introduce my two board members that are here. Maybe when I mention, you can just stand up and wave. Mr. Mukesh Shah and Mr. Andrew Njoroge. And also, I see Madam Mariam Abdullahi. Thank you for coming. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this morning. I also want to thank our distinguished panelists, my friend Marianne and Sandeep. Thank you for availing yourselves this morning. And of course, our wonderful moderator, Julian. I think we're all waiting to hear from you this morning. I want to also thank our customers for making their time this morning and giving us the time to come listen to this presentation. I don't know how we did our calendars to have it on a morning like today, the morning of presidential elections in the US, where most of us will probably be red-eyed because we didn't sleep, right? But it happens to be that day. So if I stumble in my presentation, blame it on Trump and Harris. Yeah, they're certainly responsible. So it's really my honor that you're all able to join us for this breakfast this morning. It is always a pleasure to connect with all of you on this platform. And we use this platform to exchange ideas on the macroeconomic environment that we find ourselves having to navigate in these exceedingly volatile times. In the way that we run this forum is that we give you our projections as NCBA, then we bring experts who then try to interpret that data and break it down to what it means. I was listening to a radio station recently, and they say that, all of us bankers like to talk about macroeconomic data. But macroeconomic data, they say, is like a bikini. It reveals a lot, but still hides the vitals. So we need somebody to tell us about the vitals, isn't it? And that's why we have someone like David D and the other panelists to come here and tell us about the vitals, which is probably the most important part of this morning. So today's forum is themed Navigating Uncertainty, Key Trends Influencing the Economic and Business Environment in 2025. Believe it or not, 2024 is almost behind us. We are not talking about 2025. And as typical of this season, I am conscious that the conversations in most of your boardrooms is at least heavily targeted on insights into the near-term economic backdrop that's likely to drive our collective fortunes and certainly your budgets for next year. You may recall that at about this time last year, the country was teetering on the brink of a potential sovereign debt default, given the June 2024 Eurobond maturity, a raging currency crisis that further exacerbated these concerns, and an unprecedented tight external borrowing environment that had, for all intents and purposes, locked Kenya out of the international capital markets. It was in this forum at that point that our keynote speaker today, Dr. David D., alongside the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Susan Koech, provided the much needed assurance that the government had carefully put together a detailed liability management strategy that would ensure that the country lives to every one of its commitment. And indeed, that assurance came through. So as revealed, Kenya did decisively resolve its exceptional financing needs related to the June 2024 Eurobond maturity earlier than expected, and thereby aided an easing of sovereign spreads significantly. Since this important resolution, the currency crisis of euro has since abated and eroded a much welcome stability in the country's financial markets more broadly. And with the related success with the battle against inflation, we're now witnessing the onset of a major pivot of monetary policy, which should undoubtedly improve business conditions. Even then, over the last 2 months, the uncertainty index for Kenya, there's something called that uncertainty index for Kenya, as measured by the Economist Intelligence Unit, has more than doubled its average for the last 1 year, following heightened socio-political uncertainty. Indeed, the June-July resistance to the Financial Bill 2024 dramatized this in our very eyes quite vividly. For balance, we take cognizance of the fact that the cost of running the national government has gone up across the world, just as it has for most households and business enterprises, following a prolonged period of high inflation, high cost of financing, and of course, the rising public debt level. These trends, within the context of a biting cost of living crisis, as well as cost of doing business pressures, continue to call for significant adjustments on the fiscal as well as the monetary policy side. As we very well know, these adjustments by nature are oftentimes unpalatable to the populace, given the already steep constraints everyone is facing. Indeed, fiscal consolidation is never an easy process. However, given the current stage of the business cycle, as outlined in the Budget Policy Statement 2024, a growth-supportive fiscal consolidation, if there's something like that, encompassing both the revenue and the expenditure side, is indeed in our national interest. To be effective, these two pieces, and that's why I said if it's possible, mobilizing tax revenue and spending way more efficiently must go hand in hand to enable our beloved country to build fiscal buffers, prepare for future shocks, and deliver sustainable development, and more importantly, ignite inclusive economic growth. Empirical research already shows that with better tax design, including a more fair and inclusive taxation, stronger public institutions, and a well-functioning revenue administration, Kenya can strengthen its tax capacity,
without appearing to cause unnecessary pain to its business enterprises and households. This is indeed the promise in the newly released Tax Policy 2024, and I urge all of you to take a look at it and please make comments on the various bills that are coming to Parliament, which are underpinned by this Tax Policy 2024. Today's economic forum comes at a time when the battle against inflation from both food, global commodity prices, restrictive cost of financing our business enterprises, and the volatile exchange rate is almost won. October inflation, for instance, printed at a 14-year low of 2.7%, thereby providing further opening for recalibration of our monetary policy. And most recently, we as NCBA became the first bank to transmit this drop in interest rates by revising our base lending rate. So those who borrow with us, hopefully you're enjoying that reduction. And those who are not borrowing with us, please come over so you can enjoy that reduction. It is, I believe, that we must continue to work together with each one of you as we collectively navigate the business cycle dynamics of the day. Going forward, with most of the key economic sectors and subsectors already back to their long-term average growth rates, as we see from the statistics, the role of government and markets will be crucial to sustaining this growth, as well as enabling households and business enterprises to build buffers that will deal with future shocks. However, this also puts the spotlight on what may be Kenya's main fundamental challenge today, which is to sustain this recovery and translate it to inclusive economic growth for both business enterprises and for households. Through the NCBA Economic Forum, we will continue to bring together the best brains in our country to outline what we see as Kenya's main growth challenges, discuss what reforms can potentially resolve those challenges, and outline what we need to do to steer back the economy back to its potential output. That's why I'm very glad that you're able to join us this morning. Quickly turning to statistics. Today, global economic activity remains steady. Real GDP growth projections from several institutions, most recently the IMF, in their October World Economic Outlook edition, project global economic growth to touch 3.1% this year, before rising to 3.3% in 2025. Similarly, data on the global PMI reading shows the global composite PMI above neutral level. This follows exceptional macro data from the US economy, continued growth in India, the European periphery, and Latin America, following really favorable weather in all these areas. The balance of risks is, however, tilted to the downside, with a number of countries facing significant challenges in achieving sustainable paths for fiscal policy. Similarly, turning to the domestic economy, we see several bright spots which are expected to support the economy. According to our in-house projections, we now expect the overall GDP growth for this year to come in at 4.8% and to remain flat into 2025. Let me remind you, when we met for this forum about this time last year, we projected 4.9% growth. So we are really just moving to 4.8, not much of a change from where we were a year ago. We expect favorable weather so far witnessed to continue to spur agro-processing and agricultural export flows, with a positive impact on food inflation. We expect the service sector to remain resilient, with most subsectors expected to grow at near long-term average rates. However, attaining this projected pace of GDP growth, which should primarily be led by the private sector, may face some challenges. Despite the positive market sentiments following the redemption of the June 2024 Eurobond, the sovereign still faces heightened demands in the medium term. Underscoring this is the fact that 38% of total tax revenue in the 2024-2025 fiscal year will go into public debt
interest payments before dropping slightly to 35% in the next fiscal year. It is clear that this fiscal burden denies the authorities the necessary resources for development spending that is so essential to our medium and long-term growth prospects. Of even greater concern to business enterprises is the fact that tax and statutory deductions remain on a rising and unpredictable path, thus impairing cash flow projections. Further, in the more recent past, the exchequer disbursements into counties and development expenditure lines have remained irregular, given the government's limited fiscal capacity, while reduction of the level of pending bills, now estimated to be at about 520 billion for the national government and 180 billion for the counties, has not been evident. And this cumulatively starves the private sector of the much needed liquidity. So given this raft of challenges, success for all of us here will require forward-looking dialogue that anchors government policy predictably today. This is an investment worth making and one that we as NCBA will stand to support. And that's why we're here today, to take these numbers and then discuss how they should inform policy. So I'm glad to have the speakers that we have today. The questions I always ask the speakers before they come on stage is these numbers, as I said, wonderful bikini. Isn't it? Beautiful bikini. Sound very beautiful, but the vitals are painful. Because when you talk to people out there, they're feeling the pain. I saw some analysis by one analyst who said that over the 2 years, we all feel 15% poorer. And I think that is true. When you look at inflation, when you look at the new taxes that have come, we are 15% poorer. And somebody else asked me, so if you come and brag about inflation being at 2.7%, what the hell does that mean for me? I think that is the conversation we want to have today. But before I invite our speakers this morning, let me invite our chief economist, who is also our group director for global markets, Mr. Rafa Agum, to shed a bit more light on the research that we have done to come up with these numbers. Welcome, Rafa.
Thank you, John, for that wonderful overview. It's indeed a difficult act to come after a concise summary. Working for John, I'm often reminded that I need to speak in a language that's accessible to non-economists. So that's the task I have today, sometimes not very easy. But welcome everyone to our board members. Pleased to see you, all our distinguished clients. It's very, very good to see all of you this early. I know you're still sort of digesting outcomes out of the US elections, and I'm sure that will be called shortly. It looks like it's leaning red. And yeah, some of us were on the other side. We'll take that as it is. I'll try and yield back some time, conscious that we were 30 minutes late, and also recognizing that John has actually revealed my key task today, which is to talk through our in-house projections regarding output, or let's say the GDP more precisely, but also provide just some color on the context in which some of those numbers are being put out there. There's a very interesting reminder when we met at Serena a year ago, and John did speak to this, making any focus on Kenya's macro was almost impossible, primarily because, as he said correctly, we were in the middle of the first ever potential sovereign debt default. We were lucky to have David and Susan at the time provide some very useful comfort. And indeed, that has since been laid to rest. So focusing 2024 outcomes in that context was obviously quite mischievous. We were bold enough to still stay with what was sort of baseline outcomes. And if you recall, the official authorities, which is government, the National Treasury or the central bank, was a bit more optimistic than us. They've since calmed down a little bit to about 5. We are lucky to have the World Economic Outlook sort of publication out as well. We have SSA numbers therein, and everybody is sort of coalescing around 5%. We are at 4.8, and has been pointed out primarily very, very good and robust performance in agriculture. Keep in mind that of the 5 pillars that Kenya Kwanza sought to prioritize, agriculture is at the core, and I think David will speak a bit to that, particularly agricultural productivity. So it's no coincidence that that's the buttress for the sort of growth numbers that we're seeing. We're seeing a bit of trouble in industry more broadly, and I know some of you are represented from there, particularly manufacturing, but services has remained resilient. And if I was to go back to the forecasting sort of plane a year ago and just sort of close on that, you should recall that at world output level, the expectation was about 3.2% growth, which we still is pretty much what the WEO has released just 2 weeks ago. So the difference is that it means that we now take from the external a slightly better external sort of dynamic. And that's important because Kenya's domestic fortunes are, as we all now understand, very strictly wedded to how that morphs out. So if in fact the currently ongoing policy pivot continues, and we've seen that on the monetary policy side, it just means that our externals are a little bit better than where we were, say, in November of last year. And that was making it very difficult, for instance, to infer how some of these macro numbers would play out if, in fact, we're imagining that Kenya was not going to stand beyond June 2024. So that the global level, as I've said, the WEO is projecting flattish growth at 3.2 all the way to 2025, significantly powered by the US. The miracle of that economy is still will still be spoken about. I think is the Economist newspaper about 2 weeks ago, which is raving and ranting about American potential that's in ways that keep surprising everyone. So you'd be surprised that in the OECD world, advanced economies, America still pretty much is carrying the heft, despite its often, well, sometimes broken politics and what we're all seeing. So if in fact that they achieve that sort of growth outcome within the context of inflation back to target, almost at 2% now, it just means that as we move into the Fed decision in December, there's potential easing there as well. And that's important because all international capital markets prices move from there. So if you look at Kenyan sovereign spreads, that alone has, and of course, in addition to the liability management strategy of this February that decisively sold the Eurobond, has made see potential chance of a better financing framework from the external. It's good news that we just concluded the 7th and 8th review as well, and with that came some disbursement. So you can see the difficulty we've had this year, and I think that has sort of torpedoed growth or slowed it down, to whichever you want to call it, is somehow, at least from the external side, getting slightly better. There is, of course, a caution about domestics, and I think this is what has brought a lot of you with regard to just debt service, application, and the fiscus generally, and what it does to what I think are the three key primary concerns top of all your minds, which is one, high cost of doing business. I think a lot of you can relate with that, be it on the input side, on the supply side, there's significant challenges there. And I know David is very passionate about solving the supply side problems, which sometimes don't really arrest our minds readily because demand side questions like, just monetary policy tends to over-dominate the conversation. But supply side sort of resolutions addresses cost of business doing issues that I think that's one of the key things that you're probably grappling with. Secondly, of course, is at the household level, at the farm level, you do have plausibly a difficulty around just subdued demand, all right? And so, for instance, John speaks about the dissonance around understanding Kenya's October inflation numbers and the dissonance between that and what lived experience perhaps would allow. The thing is, if you look at Q2 numbers for this year, which is why the growth forecasts are slightly coming lower, Similar period last time, you're about 80 basis points down. So it tells you that there's a demand component of that inflation number that perhaps needs to be teased out. So you have to look at the balance. But at the household level, subdued demand is, of course, a concern. And then more importantly, and we speak to this directly, as commercial banks, is a high cost of credit. All right. And this is the last point I'll make, which is if you've seen the policy pivot from the Central Bank of Kenya, we've moved cumulatively in two stances, 100 basis points. So we are 12% with the policy rate. Short-term rates, if I'll allow, similarly have begun ricocheting, or rather replicating that. So for the first time, I think you saw last week that 91-day T-bill and most all T-bill rates are now below 15%. Of course, you'd want to see that much lower, given the implications for the cost of credit. And what's holding that, and this is just me sort of setting the scene for David's presentation, which I haven't seen, but I'm sure he'll speak to this. But the context there is the fiscus is making it a little bit difficult to get those rates to where potentially would be more meaningful for a lot of households, and let's say, for instance, at the farm level as well, because we have this priority, and John speaks of the trade-off very plausibly, and think very eloquently, which is you have to consolidate. Another, I think in our vernacular, just funga mishipi, like trying to live within our means, without impacting growth, which is actually essential to addressing that very problem of making sure that our primary balances or fiscal balances are perfectly sort of outlined. So the fiscal consolidation priority, I think you hear this a lot, and that's the only sort of technical word you'll hear from ourselves today, basically just means that. And I think the surprise for us this year in this sort of outcomes was actually June, July, because in fairness, this was the second budget for the Kenya Kwanza administration. It's important to remind ourselves what they sought to do. They had a plan. They had 3 or 4, 5 key principles. One was to actually address the high cost of living, if you recall. Second was to eliminate hunger. Third was to widen the tax base. It seems very familiar, right? All right. And then a couple of others, including boosting our reserves. And with that, they had a good sort of implementation framework around the 5 key pillars. So if you think about it, the part of that policy priority was meant to address significantly long-term structural issues. And I think for us to see results, they may not even benefit from them. Maybe a new administration may see some of the work that they're doing. This is how economics works. I mean, those are long lead items. But in the immediate term, the priority was to address the macroeconomic stability question. Fact, we had a reeling currency. We had a parallel market. We had a dollar liquidity problem that we've never seen before. And that is a key price, the exchange rate, which has implications not only in of itself as a price, but has pass-through effects onto our inflation numbers. So if you see, for instance, the shilling's performance, you can relate it very squarely to where we see the outcomes. That's one. So they have to address the short-term macroeconomic stability question. I think on that key price that's been delivered inflation, you can take whatever argument we want to make, but that's trending where at least below the medium-term target. And then eventually, and more critically, where it hits us all, is on the interest rate side, which is the third prize. So you would argue that despite our dissonance about lived experience and actual numbers that John spoke to, there's actual macroeconomic stability in that sense. All right. So you see, for instance, you have better liquidity in the FX market. I think what's remaining is to address the fiscus, which is where I'll stop, and perhaps ushering John back to close. But we are happy to discuss the points. I was just trying to sort of lay the context in which I think David's remarks should be understood. But from an NCBA perspective, we are seeing, despite the challenges, we are seeing significant sort of also pockets of growth, which we can also tap in. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Rafael. I think that's quite gives a very good background as to how we go to our projections as NCBA. And now it gives me great pleasure to welcome doctor into the house. As I said before, we had the bikini. That was our job. Let the doctor come and examine the vitals. Dr. David D is currently serving as the chair to the Presidential Council of Economic Advisors. Dr. D is an economist, author, public intellectual, and well-known columnist covering economic development and governance issues. Previously, he served as the chief strategist of the National Super Alliance. He has also had a long career in civil society, going back to when he co-founded the Institute of Economic Affairs at just 26 years old in 1994. The Institute became Kenya's first independent policy think tank. A renowned scholar, an astute researcher, Dr. Ndii also is an SNO fellow, has written vastly, and has been cited numerous times by fellow scholars. He is listed as faculty in Strathmore's Safaricom Business Journalism Fellowship. He is a Rhodes Scholar with a PhD and a master's degree in economics from the University of Oxford, and another master's degree from the University of Nairobi, where he also pursued an undergraduate degree. For those who have engaged David D, I tell you, he makes things seem simple. That's what we look forward to. So, Dr. Ndii, doctor, the patient is ready. Please come examine the vitals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, morning, everyone. All protocols observed. I think we have to agree that you have to stop introducing me at this forum because I think I'm now sort of a household member. I'll make two comments and then dive into what I have to speak to because we don't have much time. One, on matters social media, I blame Jeff Koinange because I was never going to join social media. And then a small industry emerged, which of parody accounts, which were posting negative things about corporates in my name and then shaking down the corporates. So one time I was on Jeff Koinange's show, and Jeff Koinange persuaded me that the only way to deal with that is to join them and have my own presence. I am not sure that it was the right thing to do, but here we are. Now, the second point I want to make is about NCBA and why I'm so happy to be here among so many friends, because I have such a long association with many of the people I can see, particularly in front here. So it's always a delight to be here, even people who are not here. So the first anecdote is that Isaac Awondo, in 93, I was a young economist at the World Bank, and I decided I wasn't cut out for multilateral, international, blah, 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 rat race. So I started looking for a job. We had just liberalized the economy, so banks were in the market for economists. And StanChart, where Isaac was CFO, wanted to hire a chief economist. So Isaac hired me. But then it so happened I also wanted to go back to school. So in the I think a couple of weeks after Isaac hired me and I resigned my job to join StanChart, I got a scholarship. So I had to call Isaac and be very sorry that I couldn't take up his job, but he was very supportive. He then since moved to NCBA, and of course the rest is history. Raphael and Charles, I was so delighted to see Charles up here. I would call these my young brothers. And to see them where they are, I think I'm very delighted. And of course, Lashora and I have a long association of arguing many things. As for Andrew Njoroge, who I only know as Ndegwa, it's another long story that I will not go into. So there you are. So this is a very delightful, and Esther, and that a long story I'll not go into. So it's a very delightful place for me to be. Now, I think I was although we haven't spoken with any of the people who have spoken, my sort of comments will actually speak to the things that have been spoken by John and Raphael. I will keep them. As you can see, I was not even, I chose the title, which is also resonates with what you're saying about navigating turbulence. We have to navigate turbulence and drive transformation at the same time. Because it is, if you do one and not the other one will come back to bite you. So that, I think, as a challenge of our administration, how do you drive a transformational agenda while you also navigating very severe turbulence? I will try and at least put a bit of sense of what we think, how we think we are going about it. So a bit of a scorecard about how we have moved from where we were last year when we were looking at sovereign default, currency crisis, political transition, political turbulence, as well, and to where we are today in terms of that scorecard. Then I will then speak to the imperatives going forward, a bit of a prognosis of what we see as the outlook both for 2025, and now that we think we are turning the corner on that turbulence, how do we consolidate and how do we drive our transformational agenda? So I'll keep it very simple in terms of organization. The scorecard will speak to the macro prices, which have been spoken to, and it's just highlighting why they have moved in the direction that they have in our view, what the impact of those are. And then I'll speak to the three things, I think, which you have to do. You can look at the fiscal sustainability, maintain external balance. You can look at those two as macroeconomic stability. It is necessary condition for you to transform and grow, but it is not sufficient. On the other one, the things that we actually want to achieve, which is growth, employment, and equity, I will speak, that is a necessary condition. What do you need to do there in terms of structural policies that will then build on that macroeconomic stability to achieve the things that we want to do for our country? So quickly, I don't know whether the colors are clear. I want to speak just make a following observation about inflation. Yes, 2.7%. October, so we are looking at the year probably somewhere around 3%. If you look at the IMF forecast, it is 5% plus. So clearly there's something we are doing on inflation that is not factored into the kind of forecasts people are making. Raphael alluded to it. It is because if you're looking at it from demand management, you see different things. And Raphael will tell you, I am not just supply side, micro. Our inflation is supply side and the solutions are micro, not monetary policy. So quickly, if you look, and you can see that the dark bar at the bottom, you have got the two things there, food and fuel. Food is green, so food has done its job. You can see it's gone sharply. Fuel was very flat for a long time, and then now you can see it's taking a dip. But if you look at the non-food, non-fuel, it's been fairly flat, and sort of the fundamental has been quite slow. So it's the transitory components that actually dominate our inflation. The monetary policy targets the non-food, non-fuel. So you really have to ask, the monetary policy can't do much about food prices. For food prices, you have to do agricultural productivity, you have to do things in a microeconomic level. And that's what we've been doing. That's why we focused on micro. We think that we will sustain the microeconomic interventions in the agriculture space to keep productivity rising. I think we have a very huge runway of agricultural productivity and production expansion. Because what we've done right now is short-term interventions in terms of inputs. We are now beginning to do interventions in the area of investment. For example, expanding irrigation, both small and large scale. We have a fairly large pipeline of irrigation, large-scale irrigation projects, because that's where our rain-fed agriculture potential is more or less exhausted. You can raise productivity there, smallholder, but ultimately we have to look at large-scale irrigation of land in places like the lower Tana, some parts of northern Kenya, and we are looking at that. We have a fairly large pipeline of investments to do that. to kick in. The other thing which we think is going to make a huge difference is on the energy side. And the thing which I think is going to change our inflation very fundamentally is the transition from fossil fuel to EV, particularly in public transportation. If you go around Nairobi now, you will see that every third motorcycle is electric. And increasingly, you're also seeing matatus are electric. Now, the cost of running an electric vehicle in Kenya is 1/3 of the cost of running a fossil fuel car. So the more you transition into EV, the more you sort of put a cap on the transport sector, pushing up prices as a result of fuel price volatility. So we think that as we do that, we are being very aggressive about it. We have a big challenge on supply of large vehicles in the global market, but we are trying to do something about that. We think we can electrify all borders in 3 years and matatus probably in 5. And that means that in itself arrests the price switch coming from the transport side. So another micro intervention. And has many other economic benefits, and I'll speak to those slightly towards the end. The third thing, which we think will make a big impact also in terms of arresting price increases, of course, are affordable housing, because that's another big component. And back to fuel, the other thing which I think will have a big impact fairly quickly is domestic energy, cooking energy. We also have initiatives there, clean cooking initiatives, transitioning most households to LPG, which is and other fuels, biofuels and stuff like that, which are actually cheaper than biomass. But the supply chains that you need and the logistics and appliances are where the constraints are, and we are addressing those ones. And also, that has an economic stimulus at the bottom of the pyramid, which of course, that's where our heart lies. So we think that there are still structural things that we are doing that will arrest and reduce the impact of these two volatile components on inflation going forward. Then you can meaningfully anchor, I think, your long-term inflation with a fair amount of confidence at below the 5% sort of midpoint of the inflation burden, probably closer to my mind, somewhere between 3 and 4. That, of course, has bearing on many other things. Let me just illustrate something about the impact of food on not just on cost of living, but also potentially on the economy. And I'll speak to only one commodity, maize. Price of a kilo of maize, what ordinary people buy, which is whole grain, they were buying a gorogoro, as it's called, at 180. It is now 100 and less. Some places near harvest 80. So roughly 40 shillings per kilo. Our per capita consumption of maize is 70 kilos. So if you take per capita consumption of 70 kilos and a saving of 40 shillings per kilo in our population, you arrive at a disposable income impact of 180 billion shillings a year for an investment of about 10 million shillings in fertilizer subsidy, 10 billion shillings in fertilizer subsidy. I want you to do the math on the rate of return on that kind of investment on ongoing. But more fundamentally, while there is a lot of noise up here by the sort of people I call upper deck in this room, you need to pay a bit of attention on the impact on people on the ground and listen to whether the people on the ground are complaining about people good cost of living. So there are some huge distributional dimensions to this change, which are intentional. And I think it speaks to the fact that the economy that we've been used to analyzing is the small enclave economy of the existing middle class. And maybe we are not paying sufficient attention to what we are trying to do is to expand that base with the kind of things I'm talking about, which don't speak to the middle class. The price of maize doesn't speak to the middle class too much. Clean cooking doesn't speak to the middle class. Border fares don't speak to the current middle class. So there's a story there, I think, that you can begin to see where some of the disconnects are. And that's about as much I'll say about inflation, among other things. I'll speak more quickly about the other things. Interest rates, I won't speak too much to that. The chart I've put at the corner there is the Fed forecast of US federal funds rate. And I think that's obviously a very positive trend. But I think the more fundamental and important one is if we are talking about an inflation anchor around 3%, then clearly that enables us to start thinking about our entire yield curve being in single-digit territory. Yeah, probably with 90-day T-bills around 5%, and hopefully with sort of the medium-term bonds not much more above 10, if at all. That's where we think that we should be going, and that's why it's so important to be able to anchor that inflation, and why those microeconomic reforms and microeconomic interventions become very, very fundamental around agriculture, energy, housing, not just because of their impact on the monetary economy, but also because they underpin the macroeconomic framework that we want to have. But the thing that you want to think about in terms of interest rate impact, which John talked about, is the payoff in terms of the fiscal space. Now, this is a very simple simulation of the potential impact of 100 basis point reduction in the domestic interest rates, domestic cost of borrowing for government. Right now, if you look at the forecast we have, it's based on a figure of a domestic cost of an average of 12%. So this doesn't even give you the cost. I mean, before this interest rate rise, the cost was about 9 point something. Now, if interest rates, we are able to achieve what we are talking about, over the next 4 years, you're talking about the potential interest cost is the sum of the two, what we have in budget in terms of interest cost. If you look at our sort of focus budget, is the sum of the two numbers. So by 26-27, it is 569 plus 255. That's domestic interest rate. Now, if we have a 1%, 100 basis point reduction every year, by 26-27, we save 255 billion shillings. So that is literally all the amount of money that we are looking for in terms of external sort of financing from the people we call development partners and the likes. So you can see that the thing we really need to do is get our macro stability right, bring our interest rates down. That's where most of our fiscal space is. That's our get out of jail card in terms of the fiscal space. That's so this it's a win-win for the private sector. It's a win-win for government. It's a win for the private sector. It's a very, very big win for government in particular. So we have a very huge skin in the interest rate game from a fiscal perspective. Next. Exchange rate story, it has been spoken. I think that's just a graphic to tell us what was driving the exchange rate crisis. You can see was really uncertainty around the Eurobond 2024. That peaked at around, you can see it coincides very clearly. In February, we refinance, we do a liability margin transaction, and that goes down immediately. But when we are looking outwards, what is the outlook? We think that there is a strong case, and a few other things will illustrate that for a stable. One, inflation. Not only is inflation stable, if you look at where inflation is now, you're talking about inflation around the same rate as the advanced economies, 2.53%, 2 to 3%. Now, that means that on average, our inflation is likely to be just about the same or even lower than the weighted average inflation of our trading partners. So from a sort of equilibrium exchange rate macro, there's actually no reason for your shilling to depreciate in terms of you are maintaining a sort of a real exchange rate equilibrium. We see a very strengthening reserve position. I think official reserves are now at 4.7 months of imports. When I talk to the governor, he's buying more foreign exchange that he needs just to keep the shilling from appreciating further. We are seeing export performance. It dipped last year. We are seeing a turnaround in that space. And then two sides, short the usual portfolio flows now with the global rates going down. You're seeing yield hunting is back. The money sort of sellers, the money salesmen are back in town. But also, what is not visible is a fairly strong FDI pipeline, particularly on the government side, PPPs, and the kind of investments I'm talking about are agriculture. The one I have on my desk, I've been working on, that's one of the big parts of council is in the order of $15 billion for the next 3 to 4 years. So to the extent that some of us is stuck in court, if you just take the airport and that and the transmission lines, that's already about $2.5 billion. There's a couple of other big ones. Hopefully we'll be able to push them through. I think we have about a $1.5 billion irrigation portfolio. Energy, a couple of big energy projects. So I think looking at a fairly, that in itself also underpins, I think, what we think is the exchange rate position that we are taking. Keep going. So now, those being the situation, I think we can be fairly reasonably optimistic about macro stability. Then we come now to the things you're calling the vitals. That's what about the fiscal question. Fiscal consolidation, what do we see? What are the challenge? What is the imperatives? The one question that, one chorus I hear out there all the time is that we don't have a revenue problem, we have an expenditure problem. So I've decided to pose the question, do we have a revenue or do we have an expenditure problem? As usual, it is always more, it is usually neither, either or. It is somewhere in between, or at least a lot more nuanced than it sometimes looks. Now, if you look at that long-term trend on the blue panel, the blue graph, that goes back to the 2002-3, the first year of the Kibaki administration, all the way to this year. And what you see, the top line is expenditure, the other line is revenue, and the bars are the deficit. And what you see there is that there is very little trend on expenditure, basically roughly around 22-23% of GDP. There's a downward trend on revenue, which is tax revenue from about 18 to about 15% of GDP. But the thing you see a very, very sharp trend is, of course, the deficit. So you have to ask, you expect the deficit to be driving up. If you are expanding the deficit, it should be driving up expenditure. Yeah? So, but why is the deficit seem to be driving down revenue? Why do you see what looks like an inverse relationship with revenue and not much to do with expenditure? The story is a little more complicated because what you see is that there is an expenditure peak which sticks out somewhere between 2014 and about 2017, the first term of Jubilee. There's an expenditure peak and a deficit kind of stick out, and then you start going down. And that, just that thing which is above the trend, that space around the trend, is where we did all the damage. Because that is the period of very heavy borrowing on the big infrastructure agenda of the Jubilee administration in the first term. That's where the SGR is and all manner of things. But of course, your deficit means you accumulate debt. And then we accumulate the debt, then what happens? Two things happen, COVID, And then, of course, the interest regime that follows, but also the fact that even the domestic interest regime, that's when we do the Eurobond, all the things that we did. So even though we don't see an expenditure trend, then what that does is what you see in the second panel. So you see, surely, yes, expenditure to GDP doesn't rise, but the line shows you your interest cost as a percentage of your expenditure actually doubles. So what you have is interest rate crowding other expenditure. And therefore, you see, you crowd out non-interest expenditure from about, again, 21% odd of GDP to a number which is now around 16-17% of GDP. So if interest cost is crowding out the real useful expenditures of government, both development and recurrent, yeah, and the infrastructure investments you have made aren't paying off yet, either because they are bad or because they are long-term. But you've taken short-term money, put it in infrastructure, and the financing costs are now crowding out your working capital. That's the story if you're a business. What do you expect? Yeah? You took your debt, capex, build warehouses, all manner of things, but you now can't finance raw materials. Okay? So, is it a revenue or expenditure problem? It is neither a revenue or an expenditure problem. It is the impact of decisions of running large budget deficits, which we know you shouldn't. If running a budget deficit of 7 to 8% of GDP 3, 4, 5 years in a row is fiscal recklessness. So the consequences of that kind of, and I wrote about it and I shouted about it and I, whatever from the rooftops, I tried to tell people, slow down, this has only one end, and here we are. But the point then is that if we have an expenditure problem, it is not a level problem of expenditure. In fact, our expenditure to GDP, public expenditure, should probably go up for us to meet all our investment needs to about 24% of GDP. What we have, oh, I see. So what we have, but it's not working. It is? Oh, okay. I remember, I don't know how to hold this thing because we keep being reminded by the president how to hold the mic because we are not politicians. They know how to hold the mic because they use it a lot. The point I'm making here is that we have an expenditure composition problem, not a level problem. Really, at our level of development, and you will see that later, we need to be thinking about 24-25% of GDP. The question is, how do we finance it? Obviously, if you need to spend 24-25% of GDP, you cannot have revenue of 15% of GDP, because then you are talking about deficits of 7, 8, 10%. So you must either scale down your ambitions, your development ambitions. If you think you have an expenditure problem and your revenue is 15%, then you must scale down your development ambitions to be able to spend 17% of GDP. You cut down on education, health, infrastructure investment. You won't be able to do it at 17, 18% of GDP. Or you have to get your revenue up to 22% of GDP, so that you're talking 20+% of GDP, so that you have a sustainable financeable deficit of no more than 3% of GDP. Now, whether you want to call that a revenue problem or an expenditure problem, really you can have a debate, but those are the kind of parameters that you want to work with. So if we choose to say that we don't want to expand our whatever and raise more revenue, then we say, what do we give up? People will tell you, oh, if you give up corruption, but corruption is not a level issue, it's a composition issue. Even if you had zero corruption, you would still need to absorb 24% of GDP to finance the things we need. And this whole number about corruption is grossly exaggerated, because if you take a look at the composition of expenditure, what are the big ticket items? Number one now is interest. It's number one. It's higher than wages. And we pay you interest. So you cannot say that we are diverting interest to other places. Number two is the wage bill. And we pay salaries. Yeah. Number three is actually amortization of foreign debt. We haven't defaulted. And we do pay education. We disburse money to schools. We disburse money to counties. So if we say that we are stealing 2 billion shillings a day, where is it? Please show me. Please show me, because I could really use that money. But when I look at the numbers and you see what is left as public procurement, where you could probably play some shenanigans, it cannot be more than 300-400 billion shillings for the entire government. And the police do fuel their cars. We pay rent for various buildings that government rents. So there's a whole narrative. The lady who spoke first talked about the screams in that clip. There's a whole lot of that stuff out there. It's very difficult to argue with. And of course, if you try to say that was not the case, the screaming back at you would drown out any sensible thing you want to say. So whatever the case, in terms of levels, we could spend better. But definitely in terms of levels, which are what matters for macro, where we need to go is up, not down. So I can sort of say that's the story. So that's the fiscal story. Let me see whether there's something else I wanted to say about fiscal. Yeah, I did. Now, the revenue question. What is the challenge? I have some... the people who talk about payroll, and now I'm going to do, I have in that first pie chart, our total employment of our workforce as of 2023. 3.2 million people are about employed in payroll jobs like yourselves, the people who are employed, but also business people who are on payroll. And 16.7 million people on what you might call the non-payroll economy. We call it informal. I am reluctant to call it informal for reasons that I will show shortly. On the other side, we have tax revenue, income tax revenue, personal income tax revenue, not corporate. The people on payroll, the 3 million people, plus a few of the 172,000 who are self-employed, doctors, lawyers, consultants, formally employ themselves, are paying, the payroll people only are paying 495 billion shillings last year. I think the number has gone up a little now. It's 500 and something billion. The rest of the people, 85% of the workforce, paid 15 billion shillings. All people who file taxes paid 15 billion shillings. The ones who are deducted paid 15 billion shillings. Now, if you call them informal, then people will say that the informal sector has no incomes. They are not the same people. But in fact, if you look at what happened, which is what I have at the bottom there, is what has been happening to the economy for the last 30 plus years, is that all the people joining the workforce virtually have joined this, what I prefer to call the micro and small enterprise economy, not necessarily informal. So if these people are joining the micro and small enterprises economy, they are not different from the people in the formal economy, in the payroll economy. So, but they're not paying taxes. So the personal income tax burden is falling very disproportionately on payroll people. And we think when we do our tax revenue yield gaps that the number of people with comparable incomes to the ones who are on payroll is about the same or more in the other economies. So it follows that they should also be paying about 500 billion shillings of income tax. So you have an income tax yield gap of 500 billion shillings. We have a VAT tax gap yield of about 600 billion. We have a customs yield gap of over 1 trillion shillings. So we know, based on certain things, that we have a tax yield gap in the order of 2 trillion shillings. So when we talk about expanding the tax base, these are things we can quantify. Now, I want to quantify, by way of example, the sector you come from called banking, so that you can connect to this. So if you move to the next slide, this is your banking sector, financial services broadly. The first panel is the number of deposit customers and the number of bank employees. So you can see from around 2015, bank employees flatline. Banks employ the same number of people that they were employing. They flatlined at around 27,000, about 30-something thousand, 35,000, I think. But number of deposit customers continued going up. So that number has increased since then from about, if you go back to about 2002, 2 decades, from about less than 20,000, number of accounts from 25 million accounts to almost 100 million deposit accounts. I think the number last was 90 million accounts. Not individuals, but the number of accounts, deposit accounts. The number of individuals is about 30 million or so. But if you look at what has happened on the other side, I'm not sure this shows very clearly what has happened there. The number on the scale, I don't know what happened to my chart, I don't know. The green lines, when the bank stop hiring, then you get the numbers on the green lines. Those numbers on the green lines, there is also a bar on deposit customers. It matches the deposit customers almost person by person. I mean the trend. But those numbers on the green line, unfortunately, my graph doesn't show who they are. Can you guess who they are? What that number is? The one with a scale which goes up to from 0 to 340,000. Those numbers are mobile banking agents. They're green lines. So where banks stop hiring, the reason why the numbers flatlined is because the business outsourced the business to independent agents. Yeah, so a bank like NCBA, which had very few corporate customers before, if you look at its customer numbers, from around that time, once they started doing whatever business, their numbers exploded of accounts, but there is no commensurate increase in employees. True? Why is this important for tax? Because when I go to the place where I do my M-Pesa type things in Village Market, on one side, there's a Safaricom shop. And on the opposite side, there's a Forex bureau. Now, if I go to the Safaricom shop, I am provided the service by probably somebody on a payroll. Yeah. If I go to the Forex bureau, I am provided the same service by somebody who's probably not on payroll. So you have two cashiers, one who's paying pay as you earn, and one who's not paying. Probably. So there is 340,000 financial services employees. That's why I'm saying, can you really call those informal sector? They're doing exactly the same thing as the teller. Are they informal sector? So there's something else more fundamentally going on in the economy that our tax regime has not been catching up with. If you listen to some of the things the KRA was talking about when it was launching its taxpayer week or something, they're talking about an API platform where we have apps that are capturing mobile smart devices numbers. There's something about monthly rental income up. There's something about digital ETR. If you look at all those things, what are they trying to do? We are trying to to have parity between the corporate economy, which is captive, taxpayer, that means either payroll people or corporate income taxes. Captive, even those who have to pay VAT, like manufacturers, are captive, and excise. And another large sector of economy, which is actually larger, which is outside of. And we think that we are in the very unusual position and very lucky position for a country at our level of development, that this entire economy is in the digital financial ecosystem. If it was in the old days when that economy was out there and you are trying to catch up with those people using manual paper systems, you probably could not stand a chance. But I think it would be a cop-out on our part to say that all these transactions are visible in the digital ecosystem that we have, yet you say that you cannot have a system of tax compliance that is equitable for everyone, irrespective of which sector of the economy they are operating. So there'll be a lot of squealing, as there must be, but we really hope that the people who are bearing their disproportionate share will come out and say that this is actually a positive thing, because purpose is not only to be able to finance the things we need to finance for the economy, but also to ease the burden. And have made the commitment internally, and I think we can make it publicly, that if we start closing particularly the income tax yield gap, we will probably take out half the income, take the, what do you call it, the tax relief, or the zero tax rate, which is now at 24,000, is it? We're taking it to 36. I think this year, if you look at the tax bills that went out, the baby with the bathwater, with the finance bill, there was a proposal to take up that to 36. I think it's back in the sort of proposals we are making. But in 3 years, by the end of this process, I think that number will probably should be around 45,000 shillings. So that you give the relief at the income and the people at the bottom. So the more we are able to bring those who are not paying on board, the more relief that you should be able to give to those who are on the payroll. And probably at some time down the road also begin to look at the corporate tax level. And I think that's a number we think if, some years down the road should be in the mid-20s or even lower. So that's how you then be able to expand the tax base and at the same time deal with the fiscal, but also begin to provide the enabling environment, and that deals with both the growth imperative as well as equity. And also the other thing we hope we can do with this is make tax paying, delivering on digital, probably completely frictionless. I have told KRA people that in the next couple of years, we expect 90% of our taxes to be assessed by algorithms. And they should be prepared to change their jobs to customer service. They will not be doing the algorithms. If all the transactions, as we say, are visible on the digital ecosystem, there is no reason why tax assessment should be made by individuals. Discretion. Because the algorithm should be able to aggregate my transactions, and using AI engines, I do not have to file a tax return. It should push my tax return to me. Say, this is what we think your tax payable this year is, and your job is either to click yes and pay, or if you don't agree, you dispute it, and then you can have a conversation. But if you have no problem with it, you should just say, how do you pay? By M-Pesa, by bank account? That should be the only conversation we have with the tax authority. So it's very ambitious. We think it's doable. And that's where we are trying to go. There is an incredible amount of resistance. Anytime you try and remove discretion in a government system, that is when you realize where the dragons are. Where the dragons operate. But I think we are totally determined it is a do or die. It is a do or die. That one we must absolutely do, because that's the only way I think we can square the circle of having the revenue we need and the low tax rates that business and people can live with. But in the meantime, I think there'll be a bit of suffering. We think we can ease the suffering on payroll people soon. And maybe at some point, if this is achieved, maybe all will be forgiven. But so I think that's about what I want to say about the revenue. So between revenue, as we said, there's a revenue dimension, there's a macro dimension around interest rates. I think we are quite bullish that consolidation will not be as big a challenge. What we need to do now, we are left with government, is to deal with the expenditure composition side, efficiency of government spending. I can't promise there that it will happen as soon as it should, because you are talking about institutional reform, PFM reforms. Esther knows that space. And it is institutional change and processes and all sorts of things are much more difficult things. But we think if we get the macro right, we can then be able to channel some of the resources to the mission critical things. There are some hills you don't want to die on. Just push the money where it has the highest impact, and sometimes you let sleeping dogs lie. So let's move on. On my second last thing, I think external balance, as I said, the second thing, this one there isn't much to say. We see it's improving. Last year when we were speaking, this graph stopped at 2022 when you had a current account deficit of 5.1. As you can see, last year, 4.2. As of now, when you annualize, as of July this year, at 3.2% of GDP. That's a reasonably okay current account deficit, I think, in terms of our fundamentals. I wouldn't worry about that. What's driving that? Exports are okay. The agricultural recovery also, because food imports were one of the things that was really driven the current account in the wrong direction, or at least expanding. So that bill is down considerably. There were also some external price type things on commodities, edible oils and things, and which were very expensive. So it's been helped by easing of those prices, fuel prices as well. The transition to EV is also beginning to affect the demand for the amount of consumption of fuel. We are seeing that slowly. By the time we are done, I think with borders, we'll be saving $1 billion of petroleum imports. Even before we do whatever. And the third very important thing here is remittances, which is the next only other thing I'm going to speak to in terms of the current account. If you move to the next slide. So, if you listen to all the conversation and debate around external account and balance and external balance and balance of payments, it revolves around trade, exports and goods and services. Now, if you look at how our external balance, this is as of July this year, is evolving in the top chart, the green colors are incomes, the blue color is expenditure outflows, and of course the red colors are balance. So the current account balance we just talked about is about 3.94 is up there. Exports, 8 billion. Service exports, 5.3. On exports, on goods, obviously we have a big trade deficit, 10 billion, because we are importing 18 billion worth of goods, exporting 8 billion. Service exports about balanced, we are exporting 5.3. That's mostly, number one, I think, is transport, then tourism. And then we also importing a lot of services, transportation also. So it's about balance. So if you look at what really is now driving our current account is what we call the income account. Income account hasn't been important historically because it is basically factor payments and it's been dominated by interest rates and dividends, yeah, factor incomes of capital. But now there is this new animal of people, global labor mobility. And if you look at the number, which is what goes into secondary income, there is also gig jobs, which people are able to do from here. That wasn't there historically because you can export your labor informally, sitting right here, and it just registered as a payment through what do you call those payment systems. But nobody really knows whether it is a remittance but it's a personal transfer. Some money has come through to individuals. So if you look at that number, the gross number of secondary income is now 7.2 billion for the 12 months preceding. So the income account on a net basis, 5.4 billion. So if you look at 5.4 billion vis-a-vis our imports of goods and services, and your trade, look vis-a-vis your trade deficit, for example, you're looking at that financing half your goods, your trade balance, excluding services, and probably when you include all of it, a substantial amount. So in a sense, if you look at from a balances point of view, it is the income account that is actually our get out of jail card as far as BOP is concerned. And you can see at the bottom there numbers that remittance component alone has gone up from 2% to 4% of GDP. And given the trends we are seeing in terms of global labor mobility, both are driven by aging in Europe. So obviously, whether people like it or not, labor mobility there is inevitable. Migration is not something they're going to be able to get away from. And the other big driver, of course, for our region is the the economic transition in the Gulf from fossil fuel economy, where those people are trying to diversify their economies mostly into now normal economy of manufacturing and services, and they don't have a workforce. So one of the big conversations we find ourselves having with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, it's about labor. So we talk about capital and labor, hardly talk about trade. Trade, we've got whatever. So there's a huge changes in the global economic dynamics. And unfortunately, these are not some of the things that have not made it to people like the IMF who have not updated their worldview. So you will find that, for example, one of the things that we have differences on our debt sustainability is that they don't factor remittances in the external debt sustainability analysis. So we're having a debate about updating their framework because it's their framework which is out of date. Once you put in these remittances, the entire story about our debt sustainability question and vulnerability collapses. Of course, the other thing is that we are still put in the group of what you call PGRF IDA countries, the poorest countries in the world. That's the DSA they are using, that's a SMIT analysis framework they are using, while we are actually a market access country. So, like for example, the liability transition management transaction we did for the Eurobond does not feature in their debt sustainability. That option is not available to us, given the categories where we are putting. I was remarking to my colleagues yesterday when we were having this conversation, not this conversation, but we were having the paradox of the fact that I update my colleagues on the economy and markets and the things we are doing and placing bonds, and my colleague Monica updates us on Haiti. Yet, what we are doing in Haiti in terms of, and it's a very high level engagement at very, very political level, punching way above our weight politically, and what we are doing with markets. Yet, if you go to the IMF classification, we and Haiti are in the same category. we are classified the same group as Haiti. So there is a disconnect there that it's a conversation we are going to have. But I think I wanted to highlight that some of the things we need to look at ourselves, don't take everything you hear from those people at face value. I think you need to interrogate the dynamics because they are not infallible. they make mistakes. They have issues around their frameworks. You know, organizations have rigid systems to change those systems, and the manuals that people use is a problem. One of the reasons why we had the challenge with the finance bill and the tax measures is because we could not agree with them on the impact of this digital leveraging on these digital transformation things we are doing on revenue. Why? It's not in their manual. Their manual only has new tax measures. So these things I'm talking about, informal economy, gig economy, that's not stuff you can discuss with them. Not because they don't understand, but because their manual doesn't allow them to factor that in their analysis. So I thought that's something we want to highlight, that there's probably a lack of alignment in terms of, but at any rate, there is no country that has been able to do economic transformation that we want to do when you are sticking with the old way of doing things. It always inevitably has to do with breaking out of the old way of doing things and doing new things. Finally, let's talk about the real fundamental questions. I've put G there as a summary of growth, employment, and equity, which is really what we want to achieve. And I think one of the imperatives and the things we are grappling with and we are struggling with at the structural level is competitiveness. Our line there, which is maroon, I think in that chart, is about our export as a percent of GDP. Unfortunately, the charts, when you move them to PowerPoint, they don't show the titles. This chart is export as a percent of GDP, very long term. And if you look at our trend line, I've put a trend line there, our exports as a percentage of GDP has fallen from just over 35%, and we are now in the order of just about over 10%. So there's something strange about our economy in terms of being able to exports being a driver of the economy. So that expansion has largely been on domestic economy. It is lower than the sub-Saharan average. You can see the sub-Saharan average is trending up kidogo. And I've used a comparator there, a country called Bangladesh, with which we have quite a bit in common, which has actually been able to use export-led growth recently in what is described as the second wave of Asian tigers. Now, what is the problem? What is the challenge? One of the questions we have to ask, if you move to the next slide, is whether we have an exchange rate problem, a real exchange rate problem. Now, in the first panel, looking at our exchange rate, since real exchange rate, those things are things which come out of my research data set, so they look a bit clumsy. Don't worry what they are, I'll explain. From 1993, when we liberalized, the green line is the nominal effective exchange rate, which is basically, instead of using $1 rate, it's a trade weighted average of all your exchange rates with all your trading partners, not just US dollars. So you take Uganda, and then you take your trade weight with Uganda and Tanzania and everybody in the US, you put your trade share, you get a nominal effective exchange rate of all countries, and it's an index. So if you look at that, even though it says it's trending down, kidogo tu, if you look at the real exchange rate since we liberalized, we have an appreciation problem. Our tendency of our currency is to appreciate. It is not for wanting not it to appreciate, but that's just whatever you do, it appreciates in real terms. I won't get into the details of why it does. We don't quite know, but it's the one conversation you are able to have with the IMF, because as far as they are concerned, exchange rates, for them, the target is to look at all sorts of numbers and say it depreciates. But if you look at what you would have to do to achieve a real exchange rate depreciation on the nominal exchange rate, it's actually something you could not possibly do. There are capital flows issues and various things. I've also compared on the other side the same thing with Bangladesh, and you see what happens is when Bangladesh also liberalizes the economy about the same time, you have a period of a real exchange rate depreciation for about 2 decades. You see Bangladesh exports take off, and then it also goes into appreciation. But ours appreciates throughout. So there is a real exchange rate story there that we have to grapple with and ask ourselves whether really, if export-led growth depends on a weak exchange rate, whether it is actually something that we are in control of and we can pursue that Asian model of cheap labor kind of exports. Of course, my answer is no. And I've argued this for a long time. But that's the template that the people who are looking at us. So our strategy, we cannot copy the Asian sweatshop manufacturing model. I don't think that model is available to us. We have to look at other things. What are those other things? Let's move on. But still, this is the big problem. Well, whatever you do, you must accumulate capital. There is no country that at our level, ultimately what you're looking for in terms of growth and prosperity is an increase in productivity, which is output per worker. And output per worker is perfectly correlated with capital per worker. So if you look at these numbers in terms of capital per worker, the green line is South Korea. The gray line is 7 Asian tigers together, and the blue line is ourselves. We have not accumulated any capital. So unless we start figuring out how to accumulate capital, we are sort of non-starters in this growth story. To do that, we know that you need an investment rate of at least 25% of GDP now that our labor force growth is beginning to flatline. Because obviously capital per worker depends on how much you're investing and also the workforce growth. But our saving rate now is about less than 10% of GDP. So you're talking about a saving investment gap of 15% of GDP. How do we finance it? I think things we must do, and I will not go into the detail, is the public sector has to play a role in saving because household savings are very difficult. We need a lot of FDI because we can't do it on debt, which is what we tried to do before. And domestic financial deepening then becomes critical in terms of intermediating whatever domestic savings and mobilizing whatever domestic savings you have so that they do not go into plots and they actually go into investment. Finally, I think the third thing, which is a different story, and I will only show a picture about it. We think that one of the areas where we have potential and the real transformative agenda for us is this green growth agenda. What is that map? That map is a map of something called the Global Wind Atlas. It's about wind power potential. If you look at Kenya, there's a very dark spot in northern Kenya. Yeah, can you see a very dark red spot? Now, there are many dark red spots like the Sahara. But the problem is, if you go to there to generate power, how will you get the infrastructure there? And how you will evacuate the power and to where? So just having a lot of wind, it matters a lot where it is. There are lots of places in Europe as well, but they are full of people. So if they are heavily populated, they are also not going, you're going to have a lot of environmental and social issues if you try to put wind power plants all over the place. But if you look at the dark place in northern Kenya, there are very few people there. And it is also only a few kilometers from places which are potential industrial hubs as well as the coast. So you can probably, it's not difficult to take infrastructure there because we already have wind power plants there. And it is not difficult to evacuate power because we are already doing it. And it so happens, that dark red spot translates to 20 gigawatts of very high quality wind power, which we can actually power industrialization at a cost comparable to coal. So we think our silver bullet in terms of industrialization, because we cannot compete on sweatshop manufacturing with the Southeast Asians, is green manufacturing. Because not only do we have the affordable, we happen to be one of the few countries in the happy position of having very cheap green power resources, we harness them. Secondly, if you look at the places which are very green,
Congo and the places, happens to be the place where you have all the critical energy transition minerals, but they don't have power. So if you combine the energy transition minerals and the power, you can begin to look at a value proposition of green mineral processing, green manufacturing into the new industries of the future. So that's what we see as our leap into the future, and getting out of the Southeast Asia race to the bottom labor cost sort of sweatshop economy, and aligning that with our own development and sort of local development aspirations. I think I've spoken a bit longer than I meant to, but I hope I still have time for conversation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Daktari. I believe we've had enough prognosis today. And you know, being in an economy class, I would say this was like economics 101, for some 401, double economics, if you remember university. But if you must remember all the facts that have been shared in the last 1.5 hours, maybe you pick a few words, right? I had bikini. I had opening places and finding dragons, which is very interesting. I had funga mshipi. That's the first time we've had our chief economist speak Swahili. So a great way to break down information economy for the public. So I'll ask our panelists to come up. Julians, I know you're burning to ask David some questions. I saw you especially writing the matter on pay tax. Some really, really good conversations upcoming. Julians is a well-known business editor, well-renowned analyst. You can already follow him on X. He's doing a lot and saying a lot. I will also ask our good Daktari to come back to the podium. There are questions and some conversation. I'll also ask Mrs. Marianne Musangi. Tafadhali, please join us on stage as one of our panelists. Works at HACO, but more importantly, the chairperson for the Women Committee at KAM. So she is representing businesses, and we've spoken a lot of businesses. Daktari, if you can join me on stage. Miriam, and then finally, Mr. Sandeep Main from KPMG Tax Matters have also been a great conversation today. If you can join us, and I'll hand over our next conversation to Julian, so we'll have our panel, and then we'll have Q&A. There's a lot of live questions that we've seen. Julian's, the stage is yours.
Asante sana. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we hit the home run, and I realize time is fast spent, so I will rejig how I execute this panel. Please, my panelists, make your way and take your seats. Dr. David D, please join us. Mr. John Gashora, you're supposed to join us. So, oh, all right, cool. All right. Please, come this way. Please take a seat here, Dr. D. Sandeep, I shall be on the extreme end here. So because of time, and I realize we have a lot of questions online, I will only ask my panelists one question and then throw it now to the audience, as well as those who are online. So I'll be reading a couple of the questions. So please get ready as I kickstart my conversation here. First, Dr. Ndi, thank you so much for your presentation. I did not go to Oxford, but I read tax bills in this religiously. I have read the Tax Laws Amendment Bill, and I have not seen the proposal on the tax-free income band. Did you mean Finance Bill 5, or how is it positioned in terms of execution?
I believe that there was an increase from 24 to 36 in the original finance bill. I'd like to believe that has carried into the tax bills. I can't confirm, but there was an intention to carry.
There was an intention.
Yeah, there was an intention to carry, but lots of things happened in the paperback.
Thank you for that. Let me start with Sandeep then. Sandeep, 4 bills: Tax Laws Amendment Bill, Tax Procedures Amendment Bill, Business Laws, and we've also seen PFM amendments. When you look at that whole execution by the government, We are salvaging, of course, the revenues we were projecting at the Finance Bill 25. How are we positioned and what does it mean for us?
Yeah, thanks, Julians, and good morning, everyone. So I think the aim of the 4 bills that you talked about is definitely to shore up that additional tax revenue that we have potentially lost from July of this year. But that notwithstanding, based on our constitution, you would still expect the FB 2025 cycle to begin this month in November, hopefully. So while this would still come into effect now, and I think Parliament needs to sort of approve that within the month, you'll see the effective date will be as soon as the President assents to it. So it would mean, and I'm not saying, I've looked at the bill, especially the tax amendments bill, it's not all doom and gloom. There are some certain good things, especially with regards to the employees. There are some good things with regard to such exemptions like the transfer of business as a going concern, which is currently VATable. So moving to exempt, not where we want it to be. We're hoping for 0 rated to encourage mergers. But essentially, those come into effect immediately the President assents, and then we will expect a new cycle by April, a new bill by April 2025.
Quick follow-up to that, Sandeep, and very briefly, is that Dr. Ndee spoke elaborately about inflation. And if you look at the tax laws amendment bill, one of the things it does is to go for a rationalization of the first and second schedules of the VAT Act around exempt and 0 rating. First, not many of us here might be clear on the distinction, and what would that mean from a cost in the business environment perspective?
Again, a very interesting question. So the first schedule is all about exemptions, which means that you do not pay tax. All right. Now, if the first schedule is a hold, which has been the case since 2020, if you saw the 2 bills that came in, acts that came in, the general idea, and I think Dr. D talked about it, is if the expenditure cannot be managed, and in a normal accounting sense, Julians, if I'm an accountant, and I am one, if I cannot get the revenue, I would talk about reducing my expenditure. But obviously what we saw here is that the expenditure has remained, if not increased, based on the GDP that he spoke to, as opposed to then saying, let's reduce the expenditure, as opposed to just clearly focusing on collection of tax revenues. So the focus of those schedules is really to reduce exemptions. If you reduce exemptions, and one of the critical ones there in the bill is the removal of the 90%, 10% threshold. So when you're providing exempt sales, which financial institutions do, and you also provide taxable sales, then you need to apportion your input claim. A better deal than having not to claim the entire VAT altogether, which is what the bill is proposing. So in essence, reduction or deletion of those exemptions, and one of them, by the way, is also family trusts, income from family trusts. So when you remove those exemptions, it only means you pay tax, which means tax will go up.
Thank you for that, Sandeep. Let me cross over to Marianne. One of the things which Dr. Ndee mentioned in his presentation, which I thought was very important, was about the distributional impact of public policy. So it hits different demographics in the society differently. Marianne, you sell to virtually all of us, upper deck Kenyans, and we, the wretched of God's children. What are you hearing from these segments of the society?
Good morning. I'm representing what is behind the bikini. Yani, reality qua ground. Actually, when Daktari made that comment, I wrote it down vigorously. And I said, I have to ask him. We manufacture products not only for middle class, but also for lower class. They don't only eat unga. They cook with cooking oil. They have to take care of their bodies, personal care. We continue to hear the noise. They cannot afford. How it affects us and impacts us is the credit cycle for manufacturers. We sell to distributors, who then on sell to wholesalers, who will then sell to dukas and kiosks. The cycle of the dukas and the wholesalers getting back their money is taking longer, which means people are not buying as fast. There is an impact down to the lowest level, whether you're talking in Nairobi or whether you're talking in rural areas in this country. So we struggle with that comment.
So Marianne, if I hear you right, you're saying cash flows are tight up till the bottom of the pyramid.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. I want to ask Dr. Ndii one question, and then I will throw it to the floor. So in case you have a question, be ready, just shoot up your hand. The drill will be that you introduce yourself and shoot one question. One question. Dr. You spoke a lot about the IMF and what seems to be a point of divergence between the government of Kenya and the IMF in terms of the analysis of the macro fundamentals. The current program that Kenya has with the fund lapses in April 2025. I had an interview with the IMF mission chief, and the indication was that we are already in talks exploring potentially a new program. How do you see it from your lens, given what you've said?
Every country which gets into an IMF program hopes to get out of it at the earliest opportunity. It's simple. Why do you get into IMF programs? Because you run into shocks from different sources. And that program, as I said, imposes even just very heavy costs in terms of just the engagement and the things you have to do and the uncertainty created, whether you are meeting, whatever. I spoke quite a while back, long before I was in government, and I said the IMF program, when it was instituted, I was not in government by the previous administration, is kind of a receivership program. IMF is a receiver manager. If a business gets into receivership, it wants to get out of it as quickly as possible. So we would like to get out of an IMF program because we think that this business is out of receivership. But there's a larger question. And the larger question in terms of global political economy is not only would we want to get out of an IMF program, because we agree here, the evidence is telling us that we have turned the corner, the shocks, the global financial shocks are receding. We are beginning to grapple with our fiscal shocks, our macro, all the things the IMF wants you to do, good fiscal hygiene and whatever we are looking okay. The larger question to my mind is a question of aid dependency. It's a question of when do we get out of aid dependency? To my mind, this conversation is that we have reached that fork of the road where we have to decide whether we get stuck in concessional financing, IDA, PGRF, which is the business we do with those people, or whether we should go where middle-income countries are, which is the market. We are a frontier market. Should we be looking to go to an emerging market and be subject now to market discipline? Yeah, what we have to do there is to have the macros which bring down your credit sovereign ratings, which improve your credit worthiness, and we can afford to be a market country. So, but of course, there are many people, including the people in those institutions, that's a very big paradigm shift. And there are many people also on these shores who are afraid of losing sight of the shore. So yes, we are having a conversation, but it's an internal conversation as to whether, one, have we turned the corner? Do we need a funded IMF program? Do we need IMF stamp of approval in the markets, or the markets can actually trust our fundamentals and our capacity to steer our economy? And when do we get the escape velocity to get out of it dependency? So we'll have the conversation. I have my position, but obviously the final determination is above my pay grade.
Dr. David, I have many follow-ups there, but in the interest of accommodating the true owners of this forum, we have a hand at the corner there, we have a hand here. So I'll take 3 from the floor, we take 3 online, then we continue that way. Please introduce yourself and shoot one question to our panelists.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. And Dr. I represent the SACCO sector. The numerous taxes that has come, and they are based on the gross income. has affected the SACCO sector so much so that you find the loan default and the saving has gone down. The default is very high, and this impact on the economy because now the employees cannot service their loans, less money will go to the bank, and then you realize that even these employees are the ones who runs the normal border economy. So instead of even using border, they walk. So as a government, have you looked at the impact, the bigger impact? Because you can have the money at the source. Why don't you allow this money to trickle down, it be spent? You'll still catch up with it as you tax in other sectors. And this has really affected the employees. And even if you look at the good best practice world over, I'm an HR expert, also at PhD level, you realize that you should not tax everything on the gross income. Because transport allowance, why should it pay build the houses? Why should it pay the shisha? All those things, you get it.
Thank you.
Yes. So the question is, we are killing the employees. And when the employees can't breathe, SACCO won't breathe, bank won't breathe.
Thank you, sir.
Economy will go down.
Thank you,
That's
sir.
the point.
Thank you. And you didn't give us your name, sir.
Sorry, my name is George Nyauke. I'm the treasurer of Sheria SACCO.
Thank you, sir. That's George. Let's take the lady here, then we come to the gentleman here, and then we shall respond to those ones.
So my name is Dorothy Angote Muya. First, thank you, David, for that, shall I say, very illuminating exposition. I just have, I had many questions, but I will abide by the direction. I will briefly comment on the issue of the IMF, and I do agree with you that it's out of touch. Where I might want to have a different view is your suggestion that we need to help them reform or change here and there, because they won't, and they will never. I remember my experience with them is we literally fought, and I think Esther has already left. I think he was in one of those delegations when governance was the main issue. That's why I was in constant involvement with the IMF and the World Bank. We literally fought, and we said we are not going to have any more conditionalities. And if you look at the record, 13 years, we never had any conditionalities from the IMF. And I recall, because of those fights with them, the resident IMF gentleman, very good gentleman, had to leave before his time.
30 seconds.
Coming back to my main question, can we just agree, David, that the government does not have the intention to expand the tax base? Because this matter has been under discussion for very, very long. If you go and look at the some of the past, what you call cabinet memos, there is an extensive one that was done to help in the expansion. I don't want to go into the details. And that would work, expanding the tax base. But I think it was not taken up and has not been taken up to now.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Because of accountability and transparency.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's have the mic here, and then we'll respond to those questions, and we'll do a second round.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to NCBA and to the panelists for a very enlightening morning. My name is Adil Al-Yusufi. I'm the CEO of Liquid Intelligent Technologies, a telecommunication and technology provider to businesses. I do agree that there is a demand issue. We serve many businesses, but these businesses are seeing their growth taper down, and they are cutting back even on essential services such as telecommunication and technology investments. The question is, while green growth can be a stimulator for demand because of the impact on employment, are we looking at direct, actually, cash disbursements to the lower deck? Is that something that can actually spur not only disposable income, but also sentiment? Because growth is also about sentiment, consumption is also about sentiment. And currently sentiment, as we've heard from several people, is not aligned to the improvement of the macro and some of the macro elements.
Thank you. Is cash transfers an option on the table? Let's take those questions, then we shall come back for more. I have some questions online. I will throw to Sandeep and Marianne, but David, please go for it.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. SACCOs, one of the things which happens when you have the kind of fiscal crunch that we had is that the revenue imperative becomes paramount and taxation becomes very capricious. I remember predicting this, telling an audience I was speaking to, because the mandarins in the treasury are just looking at their liquidity and whether they are going to be able to make payments or default, and they go out and catch the easiest revenue. That's unfortunately the case. Having an IMF program compounds the problem because, again, you are trying to meet the structural benchmarks that will enable the IMF to go to the board and disburse the next tranche. And that's how we got into the finance bill crisis that we want. It was not the tax regime we would have chosen for ourselves. Let me say that. It's my personal whatever, but I'm willing to put that on record. So, yes, the SACCOs, other people, that's why I spoke about the captive people, corporate, payroll. The people SACCOs are talking about are in that category. Our challenge is how to get out of that situation. So that is just conceding that that's just what we say. It is what it is. Are we prepared to expand the tax base? I think the point I was trying to make is that the opportunity for expanding the tax base now without dealing with the kind of issues and the political economy and vested interests that have eaten previous efforts is digitization. We know it works because there is one place we have done it, which is government payments, by doing single pay bill for all government's payment. The A&A has tripled. Yeah, but the squealing from the places where that revenue was leaking is very significant. So, on the revenue side, let me just give you an illustration. When I came in, we came in, and the first conversation we've had with KERA, they showed us their corporate plan and the plan to increase ETR installed in cash registers from 150,000 to about 250,000. The thing which struck me in that conversation was that I looked at that number and I said, wait a minute, you have 200, you're talking about 200,000 ETRs. I already knew at the time that businesses, Safaricom and these digital people had already 800,000 plus digital tills. What is a digital till? It's a cash register. So physical cash KRA was stuck in physical cash registers, while cash registers have gone digital. It has taken 2 years to drag KRA to do a digital ETR, a piece of software that you actually then attach. The payment service providers will put on cash registers so that when I go to a shop, if I pay by cash or by card, it goes into a cash register and it has an ETR. But at the back of the cash register, there's a pay bill number. If I pay that pay bill number, for some businesses, it doesn't go into the same system. It's taken 2 years. So I hope I can convince you that the approach we are taking is not, because the approach which was there before was compliance-based. It was assuming that there are lots of businesses, corporates who are evading tax, multinationals, and not looking at the way the economy has changed structurally, so that you have the growing part of the economy is not included in the tax system. So I hope that I can confirm that the gentleman from Liquid asked about transfers. When we were here last time, Agashora made a very important point when I spoke, and he described the economy that has been growing and the issues we had had led to pending bills, and he called it the LPO economy. We are coming from an economy which was public procurement debt finance driven. Now that's the demand that is collapsing. And it's inevitable because it's not sustainable. Even the consumer demand that was driving the economy was that debt-financed, public procurement-driven liquidity. So there will be withdrawal symptoms from that. And I think we spoke about that last time. But when you ask where the impact is, let me take you further than the bottom where you go and take you further. When you look at the people at the rock bottom who buy gorogoro of maize, when they have extra disposable income, they don't buy lotion. They improve their nutrition. They're able to afford a packet of milk or eggs for their kids. So if you look at where the demand is happening, it is still within agriculture, both in terms of the benefit and also where it's growing. This is the first time we are having agricultural-led growth. Why? It is because the first thing that people are suffering from is hunger. And I think that's something which is not appreciated very much where we sit. Because if you remember the protest that we first encountered, were people wearing sufurias on their head. That is no longer the case.
Thank you. Marianne, as you respond to Dr. Dean, there's a question here for you. Let me just read it again, sorry. Don't manufacturers have some bandwidth to give us some price softening given the prevailing environment and the fact that in the 4 bills we've seen, taxes are still likely going up? Then to Sandeep, how do we make sense of the Business Laws Amendment Bill and specifically its proposals on the 3rd schedule of the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act? You get where that person is coming from. Because if you look at the raft of products subject to export and import promotion levy, it's widely expanded. Let's start with Marianne.
I'll go to the question from online. Can we soften the cost of products? Cost of manufacturing in this country is very high. When you look at, and it's something that Tari mentioned, when you look at electricity cost, in Kenya, we pay 18 US cents. In Egypt, the cost of power is 0.04 cents. You can see the difference. That's the largest cost that impacts manufacturers in this country. I won't go into your area too much about loans, the cost of loans. When you're paying 20 to 22% on interest, that again impacts the cost of manufacturing. Logistics costs are very high. Our roads are not great. The cost of fuel is not coming down. Unfortunately, the EV agenda is on borders and matatus, as we heard earlier, but we need to transport our products from one end of the country to the other end. Regulations and policies. We don't know what new regulations are going to come up in the beginning of next year. And this uncertainty definitely affects and impacts our cost of production. So it is difficult. And yes, manufacturers do look at how they can soften the cost of products in the marketplace. You know, when you walk into Naivas, Quickmart, or any Duka, you won't only see Kenyan products. You will see products from China. In fact, Chinese are now opening up retail outlets in this country very, very rapidly. And when you go to those outlets, you find Chinese products. Now, the cost of production in China is far lower than it is for products that are manufactured in Kenya. So as an industry, we have to be competitive because we're not only competing against each other, we are competing against China, we're competing against India, we're competing against Vietnam, who are able to manufacture at a much lower rate. So yes, we are trying to soften as much as we can, but we also have to pay back our loans. If you look at NPLs, which is the sector that is hurting the commercial banks the most?
John is smiling.
It's manufacturing. We will talk a little bit more about that. But it's manufacturing. We have to pay back our loans, right? And that cost is extremely high. And it's not what somebody in China is paying, who is being subsidized by the government. The government are supporting that sector. And we really are trying to urge government to look at finding ways, whether it's through PPPs, to finance and support manufacturing in this country of ours. And those are the ways that we will then be able to get into reducing the cost of products. Green energy was talked about a little bit earlier. Those are ways of seeing how we can lower our costs. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Marianne. Sandeep.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. I think maybe just first to touch a bit on that cost of manufacturing that Marianne talked about. Obviously, tax is a driving factor because you wouldn't want, as a manufacturer, to then take that as a cost to yourself. You are passing it on to the consumers. Sorry, talked about the green energy and the wind projects. I don't know how many of you ever felt if KPLC Lake Turkana is a major supplier, but the full capacity is not yet being taken off to the national grid. So that impact, we are not feeling it in any sector. But coming back to the third schedule, obviously a number of changes that are happening there. So you would see like the reliefs are proposed to be deleted, and that's because you're getting now a deduction. So this would be better for so things like the medical fund I saw SHIF as well, reduces your gross pay before you pay tax, essentially. So that could be a better thing. Currently, how SHIF works is that it's out of your net pay, so your take home is less. So this might be a good thing, not might, it is. Obviously, there is an increase in the railway development levy, the proposed increase from 1.5% to 2.5%. Again, talking about an increase in these taxes will result in an increase in cost of production, an increase in the end product. The one that you talked about the export promotion levy, you recall this was initially at 17% in 2023 as proposed, I think finally landed at 10. The aim of the export promotion levy is to encourage the local manufacturers to then be the suppliers as opposed to importing. So the term is a bit confusing when they call it export promotion levy. It's actually to discourage importation of those particular products. And I think the critical one I saw there was cement, or the raw material for cement. Does it make sense that we're having significant, okay, per the news, significant housing projects, and if I import cement because the manufacturer cannot manufacture by demand, then I'm going to pay additional tax. That is going to be built into the cost. So current proposal is between 10 and 17% again. Obviously, I don't think we'll have time for public participation as we have had in the past, because this is a high priority, likely to be passed as is.
All right, I want to take another round of questions. Nelly, you're my timekeeper. Please just flag me as you feel I need to dial down. We have a hand here, Eric at the back, and Jimmy at the end there. So let's take those four, then we shall get back.
All right, good morning, everyone. Jimmy Bogo from Citizen TV.
Jimmy, if you could rise, please, so we see you properly.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Jimmy Bogo from Citizen TV. A quick question to Dr. Ndii. So what we're hearing from the National Treasury is that in the medium term, government is looking to cut taxes. What we're hearing from the director budget is that they're looking to raise about 170 billion shillings. Question is, are we likely to have these taxes coming down anytime soon? And if so, when?
Thank you. Jimmy, on the MTRS, essentially, if you look at it, the medium-term revenue strategy. Eric?
Yeah, my name is Eric Mokaya from Mwango Capital. The question I had specifically for Ndii is on disposable income. I think when you talk to people on the ground, is that the last 2 years or so, disposable incomes are down, and then there's increasing taxes from SHIF and all these other things. Ask, like, what's the plan in terms of cautioning people from these kind of heavy taxes that come and unpredictable at times, so that they can be able to at least spend and be able to boost businesses, because businesses are crying, the individuals are crying, so I don't know where relief is supposed to come from in this regard.
There was another hand. There are two here, actually. So three. Sorry, let's take those three.
Thank you. My name is James Gitao from Peak Performance. When there's uncertainty in the economy, in the country, when there's a lot of noise, people hold in the investments. They hold on to the investment, they don't invest. So the question is, what's the government doing to help lower the noise and create more certainty so that people can invest? And finally, when is Kenya joining BRICS? And do you see value in that? Thank you.
Thank you. Are we joining the BRICS? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Fozan. I head up the manufacturing sector. For me, it's an extremely key sector because of economic growth and GDP growth, value creation. the innovation that it provides, export growth, economic stability, and poverty reduction, everything that you talked about in your presentation. If I was crafting my next 4-year strategy, what would be the 4 points that would be key for me to focus on in terms of creating value within the manufacturing sector? And I think Ms. Wamui spoke a lot in terms of what's happening in terms of disposable income. It's coming down, we are taxing more, but the revenue that we are collecting from tax is not necessarily going into large infrastructure projects. And whilst I'm all for the bottom-up economy, there's a bit that needs to happen at the bottom that's probably not happening from a policy perspective. So if I was looking at my next 4-year strategy, what would be the key focus points? Maybe just 3 that you would guide me on.
Thank you for that. Did we have a, yes, there's a hand there. The last one, then we respond to those.
Thank you, Doctor. Abid Mariam, supporting the manufacturing industry. Something you mentioned, the cost of doing business. Just want to give you a simple thing for your team to think about. If you were to organize a system where companies which are doing 20, 30% of their volumes in export, they have a serious problem even now on VAT refunds. So if you were to organize that one, and secondly, in some countries, they've organized or made a law that businesses must pay by 15th of the following month. Now, I was just doing a quick calculation as we were sitting over here. For my medium-sized company, the cost of finance on these two is between 4 and 4.5%. Now, this I'm sure applies to most of the companies who are in manufacturing. And if you were to do that, it's something easy for you to consider. It would make us a little bit more competitive. Mariam, would that be in order? Thank you.
Thank you. Some thoughts there on VAT refunds. So let's respond to the questions, and all of them were challenged to Dr. D. One is on taxes. On one hand, we're hearing about reducing, and on the other hand, we're hearing it's coming down. Then we have a question on disposable income. Disposable income from Eric. All right, that sounds a lot more clear. Then we have how do we lower noise? And this is for you. The noise creates certainty, and the cost of doing business, and are we joining the BRICS? And finally, forward-looking 4 years, what are 3 things you'd look at? Dr. Lee.
I think I can be quick with those. I think the first question, the gentleman provided the answer. He said in the short run, they want to raise 174 billion. In the medium term, we're talking about lowering the rates. That's what I've been saying. Short, medium. So the first one is short. The real question of lowering is medium. And I think it also speaks to the question of disposable income. When are people going to see relief? I want to make reference to something I said before. When you're in an IMF program, you are in the receivership. There's no relief. You're only going to get relief when you come out of receivership. When companies are in receivership, what do? They cut costs, they lay off people. A turnaround is costly and it is difficult. The question is, many countries don't do it. The reason why many countries have remained where they are and they are in cycles of macroeconomic crisis is because they don't bite the bullet. They take Panadol for their headaches and don't deal with the whatever. An IMF program is just a palliative. What we want to do is the structural things that we are doing. And that's why we titled this thing Navigating Turbulence. So we can't keep going back to the question, how much relief do we provide at this point in time? At this point in time, 0. There's no point, I think, whatever in that point. The other question was on?
We have a question on lowering the noise, creating certainty.
Noise, I think the noise will be lowered by evidence. The numbers speak for themselves. Let actions speak louder than words. When we start saying that inflation is 2.7%, and some people who want to make noise say you are cooking the numbers. So we keep quiet and let the debate go out there. Has the price of unga fallen? Has the price of sugar fallen? Has the price of cooking oil fallen? Can you tell me these price falls don't make a difference to anyone? So the narrative out there is what this lady spoke about. You have a social media narrative. And you have what's going on the ground, and I don't think we can compete. with the social media narrative. What we do, let me speak now to manufacturing and say something which may be palatable in this audience. If you go to the economic survey, you will find a chapter on the economy and manufacturing, showing that an employment chapter, I think it's usually the second chapter, showing manufacturing, the first chapter, 7% of GDP, second chapter, employment in manufacturing, 350,000 people. 7% of GDP, 350,000 people. We have a workforce of almost 20 million people. So if you work out the number there, the output per worker in manufacturing is it's probably 2 or 3 times the other sectors, which it should be, but that's because our manufacturing sector is very capital intensive. Okay, so the carrying cost of capital is very high. But we have another manufacturing sector which is not here. If you go further down, the employment statistics, and you read that informal sector space, it's broken down by sector. Number of employees in formal manufacturing, how many? Who will make a guess? 3.4 million. 10 times as much. So we have an entire manufacturing sector. Sure enough, output per worker there is lower. It's about 200,000 shillings. In the one which she works in is about, it's 5 times as much. It's about 1.5 million shillings per worker, but that's because you have more capital. But still, when we talk about these 3.4, nobody employs people who are not doing, in manufacturing in particular, those people are working. If you drive up towards Karen at Langata Road, you will see it very busy there. They display a lot of furniture and all sorts of things. If you drive towards Eastlands, they are selling wheelbarrow, agricultural implements, furniture, all sorts of things. So where is the purchasing power going? The purchasing power is going there. When you see that China is competing with putting us out of business, I see a lot of Chinese gadgets, but I still buy my metalwork from our Juakali. So our real competitive manufacturing sector is Juakali. So what would I do for the next couple of years is see how we can really mainstream that sector, because that's where manufacturing competitiveness is, and we are doing it. One of the things we are doing as of now, we are giving that Juakali people all the fittings contracts for affordable housing. And they're structured, they're organized. Right now, they have about 20 billion shillings worth of contracts. And we are sort of then giving them, empowering them how to standardize, how to mass produce. That's where our manufacturing, our real manufacturing sector is. It is not in this room. I know it's unpopular here, but that is the reality.
There was a question on whether you see value in joining the BRICS.
That's foreign policy. It's very murky at the moment. I don't think, I haven't had any intention to join the BRICS, but you may want to note that we have recently joined the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Thank you. Do I have time for another round of questions? One more round and we close. So we have a lady with a hand there. You know the drill, introduce yourself and shoot your question. The microphones? Yeah, sure.
Good morning. My name is Wairimu Jenga, and I'm a business journalist working with KPC. And my question is to Dr. Ndi. Earlier on, you talked about electrifying bodabodas in the next 3 years and matatus in 5 years. But then when you talk to sector players, they're talking about this being unattainable, citing, of course, policy issues and high taxation on electric vehicles, which is, of course, hampering the growth of the EV sector. I'd like to hear from you, Dr. Ndi, if there are proposals to reduce the taxation on EV vehicles, and also if they're importing these vehicles based on the taxes that you import on second-hand vehicles, is there something being done about that?
I only saw that one hand, and I'd like to mention that Finance Act 23 actually did a bit of that reduction of tax on EVs, but I'd like Dr. Ndi, since it... Yeah, sure. Any other question? Dorothy again. The last one.
Is that a question?
Dorothy, we can still hear you. You know, your voice is...
Okay, it's not a question. I appreciated what you said about the question I posed. The proposal was digital.
Okay.
Yes, and you'll be surprised, very surprised when you have a look at it.
Okay, I will do that. I will do it.
Thank you. Looks like Dorothy and Dee should meet on the side. But Dee, please, Dr. Dee, respond to the question raised.
Evie, there were some proposals last year, but what we've done is we have also trying to rescue some of the things that went with the bathwater in this new. But in addition to that, we have the process of finishing. Actually, we have finished a policy regime, mainstream EV into our motor vehicle assembly regime, including both bikes and whatever. It turns out when you go to the motor vehicle tax incentives, because they were done a long time ago, there's a whole schedule of CKD kits and what goes into CKD kits. The drive motors and the batteries for EV were not there for the simple reason that they didn't exist. So one of the things we've done is to put them in those schedules, and that should go through in the next couple of part of this raft of reforms. That will mean you'll now be able to bring an EV CKD at zero tax, the same way as making parity with the IC vehicles. On motorbikes, there was a very peculiar regulation. These are usually done by lobbies and interest groups that restricted where you could assemble motorcycles. You have to be a registered assembler, and you can only do it. So you could not do contract assembly. So like what AVA does as a contract assembler for franchise holders, you couldn't actually do that. Currently, you can't do that for motorcycles. And we have listened to it. So we are also removing that so that the existing assembly plants for motorcycles, Car in General has one or two, a couple of other people, can actually become contract assemblers for other brands. So that's one of the restrictions that are restricting scaling up. But as far as scaling up, certainly motorcycles we are scaling. We know that there are investors who are putting up assembly plants with capacities of up to 50,000 bikes a year. On buses, which is where we are really where we are focusing on EV, and somebody talked about transportation of goods. The simple reason we are doing on passenger transport is because that is the thing which is government can do as public policy. We cannot do direct intervention with logistics of business. So what we think is once we do the public vehicle transport, you build the scale, for example, of charging infrastructure around that. And then you provide a critical mass so that the rest of the industry can come along. So it's really a way of catalyzing. It's more catalytic because it also has the benefits of bringing down urban transport costs and that kind of thing. The big challenge with buses and trucks is supply side because of a huge demand. I tried to persuade Ashok Leyland. I actually went to the house of that gentleman, Hinduja, to his house himself specifically in Delhi to have one. And he promised us 1,000 buses. They do buses called Switch, even for the city of London. He promised 1,000 buses. We are still talking. We are still in the queue. So what we're doing is now being more proactive with Chinese manufacturers. And then because they are slightly more expensive than ICE vehicles, particularly for transport, we are looking at financing in which we can plug in things like carbon credits and stuff like that, so that we can bring the actual capex to parity. Because operating cost, as I said, the operating cost of a diesel matatu, these minibuses we have here, we have got the numbers as 51 shillings per kilometer. The operating cost of the EV ones is 14 shillings per kilometer in terms of fuel. So the cost gain there is very significant. Oh, yes, because the economics work, there is no reason why we shouldn't deal with whatever, especially since we are creating. I believe that we have huge potential to actually become a manufacturing base for motorcycles because there is a 5 million bike market in the region. And if you look at replacement demand alone, it's more than 500 million bikes a year. That's something that I think we have potential there in terms of manufacturing.
All right, I'd like to invite my panelists to give their closing thoughts, a minute each, and let me start with Sandeep, then jump to Mary, then I come to Dr. D. Sandeep.
Yeah, thanks, Julius, and thank you so much, NCBA, for this particular invitation. I think for me, it's just the laws and the bills that we have discussed today are far more deeper. Dr. D talked about agri and how agri is, resulting in the growth of the country. You would see that the fertilizer is now being proposed to go to exempt from zero rated, which means the cost would go higher. So I think for us as taxpayers is to ensure that we go through all these bills in detail and then take the opportunity to do public participation and knock on the right doors with the right support. So I think that for me is critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Thank you, NCBA, for calling us here. Unfortunately, we didn't have too much time, but I think we've managed to put out some points across. As Kenya Association of Manufacturers, we also oversee SMEs. In fact, they're the largest group of our members. And I do sit here representing women who majority are SMEs. When it comes to government and the efforts the government are making, I want to assure you that Kenya Association of Manufacturers are working very closely with government. We have an agenda of enhancing and building up the manufacturing sector to 20% of GDP in 2030. There are plans in terms of how to achieve this. One of them is impacting on the agricultural sector, which Dr. here has talked about. He has talked about it in terms of food, and that, of course, is very critical for Mwananchi. But as an association, we have to see how do we add value to the agricultural sector so that when those agricultural products are being sold out there and exported, they're bringing back higher value. We are currently selling avocados, avocado fruit. We have to move into pressing into oil. The price for oil is over 10 times higher than the avocado fruit. And this is what we're looking at, backward integration and then moving it forward, identifying export markets. Export markets is critical for our manufacturers because one, it will bring in more foreign exchange into this market, and that is very critical, as we have seen, reducing costs. Transforming the manufacturing sector, we need to adopt technology a lot more. How do we use AI? And I think, Dr. you talked about KRA moving to using AI. We are also looking at it in the manufacturing sector. Global competitiveness. How do we ensure that we can compete with the likes of China? Dr. please bring those EV bike productions to this market. Let's create jobs. Let's continue to enhance our productivity. And let's show the world that they can actually buy Kenya, because that is the only way we will build Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. D, close it for us.
The takeaway I want from this forum, and I think the conversation I think we need to be having, we have to having a sort of common denominator of a conversation. It's a word which is used a lot in economics and aviation, takeoff. We are takeoff point. When you're in an aircraft, you know takeoff is turbulent. So you have to deal with the turbulence of that takeoff. But if you don't get the velocity to fly, takeoff aborts. I think the thing which is standing between us and takeoff in this country is lack of ambition, self-belief. When I talk to people about some of the things we think we are doing and can do, what you see is disbelief. Because we are not accustomed to thinking at that scale and level. We have not accustomed to thinking. We say, yes, we can become middle income. We want to be, how do we copy the Asian countries and all sorts of things? You cannot doing that by doing the same small incremental thing. because we don't want to lose sight of the show. I don't want to revow and think about my business. I'm thinking about my quarterly results. If we stick there and stick with how do we provide relief to consumers for today, we will abort the takeoff. That's where we are. If we stick believing that we cannot lose sight of whatever in the confidence of having assured money from the donors and the stamp of approval by the IMF, our takeoff will abort. So the question is, are we ready for takeoff?
Thank you, Dr. David D. Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Marianne. Let's appreciate this panel. Unfortunately, I had to rationalize the time in the interest of all of us. I hand the program back to the Provost and Controller. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Julians. We've come to the end of our forum for 2024 and some really good reflections. It's been 4 hours. Thank you, everybody, for those who've made it to, to stay an extra hour. I believe the class, let's call it an extra masterclass from the masters, has been really, really amazing. So thank you for extending your time. David, I know I talked about social media, but what you also don't remember is I was among your employees when I was very young in university. So at that time, I believe we were also putting together another government 25 years ago. So when we speak of progress and empowerment, we are beneficiaries of some of the things we did. It was a secretary job, but 5,000 bob 25 years ago was quite something. It was good. There's no M-Pesa at that point, so obviously we're getting from the ATMs. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom alongside the rest of the panel and Julian's. If I close for today, before we go to thanking everybody that's here, I heard about taking Panadol for your headache. That's a big saying, by the way, in Nigeria. Why are you taking Panadol for your headache when you really, really need to diagnose the real problem? Interesting reflections. Relief might take longer. Receivership is painful. Policies to protect bottom end of the pyramid, which Marianne talked about, and also enhancing productivity. Some really good reflections as we think of 2025. The macros are turning around. I believe we projected 4.8% growth, and hopefully that's where we land, if not better. Let me take a moment to thank everybody that's here. We're going to close so that we do not disrupt the session with photos, and I can see there's some giveaways here. Thank you to our customers for taking your time. Thank you for being here just to have great discussions on matters economy. I thank our board of directors who've been represented here. Some of them have had to leave. Thank you for being here. The NCBA leadership, NCBA colleagues, our customers, our media team. Thank you, members of the Fourth Estate, our PR team, our marketing team, our corporate banking team. Our corporate global markets team are also here. Thank you for all the work you've done to bring together a forum that's largely on thought leadership and driving the insights for 2025. The Norfolk team, Asante for always accommodating us, and Discman for putting together the wonderful branding for NCBA, the bank that says go for it. And finally to Daktari, Asante, you can see most of the questions were directed to you. The questions will not stop coming. And social media, whether we like it or not, and stay there, don't leave, is a great forum to address where the new consumers of the future speak. So they might not be on mainstream media, which is where you'll find Julian sometime, but on digital is where the conversations are happening. And it's good that we continue listening to those conversations because they do matter too, even when we're not sure if they are fake or not. Our panelists, thank you very much for representing the different sectors. I believe we are more enlightened on matters manufacturing, matters tax, and Julian's for your wisdom in deciphering the numbers and bringing out the best answers from our panelists. Thank you, everybody. We wish you a great day. Julian's always says Kenya is our business. It is our business, right? So we are committed to make sure that this country continues to prosper. Thank you very much. As we close, I'm going to ask our Group Managing Director, Mr. John Gashora, to join the panelists on stage and the moderator. We have some gifts and some photo ops, I believe. Jackie, you'll help us organize the photo ops. Thank you very much. Asanteni sana and have a great day ahead. Thank you.